Okay, so we are now live, which is pretty cool. Obviously, me, my buddy Alex Rudd, you guys see all the time, and Mr. David Swenseid from Duo Realis. We've gotten tons and tons and tons of requests on like actually in-depth Spybait information, so we just went to the source himself and got him on here. So what's going on, my man?
Gosh, well, hey, it's good to see Alex. I think the last time I saw him, I know he didn't have all that facial hair. I'm just saying, man. So I know he's been working at it. That's for sure. I'm envious. That's why
I got lost in the woods for a few months or something like that. This is what happens when I don't have to work for 4 months. Is I just go everything just goes all to hell.
Yeah, for real.
It looks good. You keep showing out, man. That looks good. It's good. Yeah. Well. Thank you for having me on. I mean,
thank you for joining.
You guys have both of you guys do a great job online, and I know it's hard work, and people think sometimes it's just running out and smiling behind a camera and then going out and showing a lure or two. And I know I met you guys a long time ago and saw your dedication to the sport, to your ability to contribute, and so I want to give you guys props for that as well. You guys have done a really good job and worked really hard. You should know that. So,
thank you. Yeah, no, we appreciate it. But yeah, dude, you are going to be the star of tonight's show because I have gotten so many people asking questions about spy baiting. And for people that don't know really what a spy bait is, it looks like a prop bait. Well, it looks like a floating prop bait, but it actually sinks. So this is the ADG fix, which is like my go-to spy bait. And this actually sinks at about a foot a second, okay? So it's going to sink below the surface, and you're going to reel this bait kind of either mid-column or like bottom of the column to get a lot of bites. And there's a lot more that goes into it than just like cast and reel. We're going to have David kind of help us out, walk us through like the basics to the advanced and everything in between. So
well, I'm going to probably be doing a few videos this year. I'm just trying to carve out time for it, which will go into a little bit more elaborate kind of context on spy baiting. There's just levels of this, as you guys have sampled as well, that you can start to really get into refining this process, even though it is a refined process, and isolate yourself into targeting big fish. And from day one, I've always said this was going to be a big fish technique. I wish I could have collected $1 every time I said that. We'd be running around in limos towing bass boats. But the good thing about it is that the technique really is. It is a potent technique. It's just not show. The presentation really does. I remember, I'll go back a little ways. Maybe this is before you guys were born, but drop shotting came out, and I watched guys talk about drop shotting. Now I was lucky enough to be in on the real front end of that. The concept of drop shotting has been around in the U.S., believe it or not, in different ways and forms. It was just that an angler back in Japan really got it into a place and a form that targeted bass and refined it there. But I can remember just fumbling with the knot, just tying just a simple drop shot. Now your little 6-year-old can tie a drop shot knot and outfish you drop shotting. So drop shotting had a huge learning curve back in the day. I mean, a huge one. And guys from the West going back east to fish and Bassmaster, FLW stuff, and that had just learned the technique were struggling to try to master it. So I got to watch this evolution take place. And honestly, there was just a learning curve. So I start out by saying, I'm the first to say, spy baiting is the easiest, most difficult presentation you will ever play with. And every once in a while, somebody raises their eyebrow to that, but it really is true. You think about it, all you got to do is cast and wind. That's it. That's really that, right? Yet there's so much more that goes into play with that, and some of the considerations. And guys, including pros, have taken the core idea of drop shotting and then manifested it and kind of contributed and spread it a little bit more. So there's going to be some things that I'm going to talk about in like a video length. It's going to, unfortunately, you got to put up with my mug. I apologize, but it'll be a pretty in-depth piece on adaptations, modifications, and even kind of how you kind of consider approaching your quarry with drop shotting. So I know we don't have that kind of time on this show to talk about it, so it's going to be pretty elaborate. It'd probably be in a series of videos, but I really did want to do that. You know, when I first broke this out, my goal was, it really wasn't to sit here and talk about a monetary aspect. It was really to help guys go to a place that maybe they never had been before. And we all fish. I thought I knew how to fish grass until I went to Guntersville. Right? You see the difference? You know, yeah. I was like, I'm really good in grass. I mean, I know how to dissect. I know how to find channels. I know how to find dense weed cover. I know how to approach things on the shallow. I know how to look for things deep, edges. I used to call the edges the bases of weeds, the Bermuda Triangle. I could catch fish in those areas. So I was really focused on grass. And I thought, but when I went to Guntersville for the FLW championship, Coastal Championship, I had this massive game plan, and I found out real quickly that I had a lot to still learn about grass. And I think that's what I'm talking about, spybaiting. Spybaiting is going to help you, in a basic sense, be able to spread your wings when you fish. Part of the spybaiting concept came from something that I used to do a long time ago, which I don't even know if guys do or do anymore. And that was, you know, shaking, and what we call mid-column shaking. The Japanese now call it mid-strolling, but it was basically Western shaking for suspended fish. And we used to use, or I would use 4-pound line, 3-pound line, and I would use a 2-inch or 3-inch, very translucent reaper. And I would take a jig head and I would stamp that jig head with a hammer and make the head so it was flat. And then that head could rock forward and backwards, cutting through the water. And this cadence that I would create would actually look like a little fish swimming through the mid-column. And I would shake on the post spawn. So after the fish would hit the bank, after they would start coming out, receding back out to heal up and feed, I would find some of the big females that had spawned earlier moving into suspended fashion, and I would be able to pick them off. And those fish were big fish. They weren't your typical 3-pounder, which is a big fish to me anyways. I get excited about a 12-inch fish. So, yeah. But these are like your 5s, your 7s, your 12s that would sit out and move off the bank and start to get into suspended form. So I would be able to pick these off. The problem is with Western shaking like that, it takes a lot of time. Everyone tells me, Spybait, gosh, it takes so much time, and I am like, you have no idea. Just try someday to Western shake on a piece of contour. So Western shaking, really, you made 1 or 2 casts, and it took several minutes to just give the right presentation. And then you had to kind of decide if you're going to stay there and try to shoot at different angles, or should you just leave. But you were looking for one fish, really. It was just a big fish kind of bite. So those big fish would eat, you know, a tiny little reaper. And I didn't bring any of my old stuff, but eat a tiny little. But I would get this thing to basically suspend. So maybe it would be 12 over 30. Or maybe it was 8 over 12 or something like that. But I'd get this thing to suspend, and those fish would come up. Well, Duo, our staff, our R&D staff, myself, we all kind of came together and just started carving away at the presentation. And later, hence came this idea called spybaiting. And the funny thing is right from the get-go, I knew that we just maximized an angler's opportunity to go and get big fish. I mean, I introduced it for largemouth fishing very first. And I think I even told Mr. Rudd this one time, that the first place that I introduced spybaiting was in Texas. And now the guys are talking about it. Jim Tutt, FLW, Dave Mansue are talking about it. I think Mansue has done well on Amistad with it. But the guys down in San Rayburn had won a lot of tournaments quietly on it. So it had this little niche over there, very, very quiet niche over there. And I'm going to say this again. You'll hear me say this 1,000 times. If you ever want to keep a secret, you tell a Texan. You just tell a Texan bass angler. They will not, if it benefits them half an inch, they will not say nothing for the rest of their lives as long as they're catching fish. So
That's so funny. It's so true though. Like, who was it? FLW Tour Pro was fishing it. I think he finished like 3rd place last year in the FLW Tour on Rayburn, and he was fishing a spybait. And it came out on the last day of the tournament. They had a camera boat on him, and I was like, wow, never would have thought I saw that, but
yeah, that's
smashing him on it.
Yeah, that well, and then Jim Tutt was.
Jim Tutt is who it was,
and he's a really good angler. Like he's been around the block multiple times. That guy's a really solid angler and a good person. I think in that maybe it's the same event, but I think in that event I just had somebody was telling me, Jim's spy baiting. Oh well, okay. I turn it on and I'm kind of looking at the watercolor and the conditions, and it just wasn't adding up to me personally. And he pulls it out of his box. He says, I have to rule this out. I've got to rule this out, is what he said. And he made a few casts, and at that sequence, I didn't see him catch anything. But the point is, that's how effective the technique is for him to actually leave the tracks and go do this when really it was something else, like maybe a big old spinner bait bite or big crankbait bite or something. I hadn't followed the whole event, but great guy. He's a great guy. Dave Mansue, again, one of the Texans. And I always say, if you really want to know when a secret is out, all you got to do is go to YouTube, and Scott Martin has it on his channel.
that's also very true, to be honest.
I'm messing with Scott, but I mean, so it's just been really cool to see how this technique has come across state lines and moved across. Moved from Texas then into Lanier. I mean, guys right now are on a tremendous. I don't know if I'm supposed to be saying this or not. Someone's probably going to get mad at me, but are on a tremendous spybait bite. On Lanier and some of the lakes that look the same, and that's because they're going after suspended spots, which was basically the second fish that I entered, or species that I introduced it to. A lot of us have heard about it from reaching up into Wisconsin and Sturgeon Bay tournament and Lake St. Clair, and St. Lawrence. We've heard about those successes, but it goes far back, all the way back to Texas and other parts too, as well in the South. So it has definitely got a good foothold. Again, going back to it being a big fish, I don't like to leave that topic. It really is. It catches numbers of fish, but when I say it catches big fish, I'm not joking. My friend Chad Gripsey, who won that FLW tournament up there in St. Clair, okay, he weighed in almost 100 pounds of smallmouth. And the majority of those fish came spy baiting. But here's the deal, almost 100 pounds, but he caught probably 150 pounds of smallmouth that weekend, spy baiting. So, I mean, he was telling me he was throwing away 4 pounds smallmouth, unfortunately he had to, because it just wasn't adding up, right? And you think about that, and you can definitely, see how strong that deal is. There's a lot of pros out there that you guys know of, the Johnson brothers, who are good guys that spybait a lot. I've talked with them. They're good people. They have their own commitments in the industry, but they've shown multiple times publicly how effective the Spinbait 80 and the ADG Fix are too. There's a bunch of guys out there, and I actually get really excited about it, because I get to see guys do things that I saw in concept. Mentally, I saw this vision already, but to see it come to fruition has been a kick in the pants. I remember one time a guy told me really quickly, he said, hey, listen, I work for Tackle Warehouse, I think it was. And he goes, I can't catch these fish at this certain lake down there in California. We've tried it, man. We just can't get bit. And I said, well, if I get some time, I'm going down, I can visit with you. So we go down there, and he jumps into the passenger side of his boat and sits down and puts his hands together. He goes, okay, let's go do this. And I'm like, dude, I've never been on this lake before. And he's like, it's spy baiting. You just go. And so it was, but his excitement around it, but he wanted to find out what the language was. How do I go from fishing traditionally to this presentation on a lake that I've tried and it just hasn't been successful. So we went around the lake. I kind of looked at the topography, how it laid out as far as angles and stuff like that. And that's how I kind of made my pre-fishing day, because we didn't really have a lot of time. But I remember going into this first cut and making a long cast down the cut, which I thought would be kind of largemouth-ish. And I make 3 winds of the reel handle, and there's a 7-pounder on the end of the Spybait on the very first cast that I throw in this cut. So now this guy's a believer and I'm not. I'm like, that was luck. That was not, had nothing to do with that was just straight luck. And here this big old female rolls out and she goes one way and the spin bait goes the other way. And he was like, whoa. And then, but when we came out, we actually fished a bluff end, which is more traditional than what I was doing. And we caught a few spotted bass. And then it just migrated from there. We caught white bass, a couple big crappie, or I'm sorry, bluegill. And then we got on a shelf and we started catching spotted bass. I mean, I don't know, maybe we caught 30, 20, 25 spotted bass, which heck, they weren't, 4-pound spotted bass, but they were still, he went from 0 fish spy baiting to actually starting to see it kind of come to fruition. So, but there's a ton of stories like that. I love hearing about guys' stories. A lot of personal bests, man, a lot of personal bests. A friend of mine, Greg, up in he's up there in like St. Clairish area, but he fishes a couple different lakes and tournaments. He runs a tournament circuit up there, and his biggest sack of fish spy baiting was 33 pounds, anchored with an 8, like an 8.3 or an 8.4, something like that. And then another buddy of mine got an 8.14 out of St. Clair spy baiting, and I think he had that day he had 24, 26 pounds. So again, it's shown itself multiple times. But if I could tell you the truth, when I was sitting down with certain people, even some of my best buddies, who are big fish experts too, kind of looked at me and went, well, that's cute, David, that's really cute, this tiny
how hard was the conversion for a lot of these guys to take this bait and actually get them to put it in their hand long enough to kind of catch some fish on it?
It was almost as traumatic as when I introduced Roman Made to the U.S. I don't know if you guys know Roman Made, but the Japanese swim bait. Most guys.
Oh yeah.
We get a Roman Made into the U.S. and it's gone in 60 seconds. But it was almost that bad. I mean, if you guys remember, the Roman Made mother was $400 and something, right? So guys were like shooting emails, calling and threatening my life. Like, how are you going to take my $400 for a swim bait? My wife will kill me, and then I'm going to kill you. So it was almost that bad. The concept, again, mind you, no one's really targeting fish that way, right? I mean, on a consistent, as a heavy wave. There may be 1 or 2 guys doing something similar, but really as a wave of anglers, you turn on a trolling motor, you take a spinnerbait, you go down the bank, everybody can do that. Everybody now is familiar with that, even if that was a novelty at one point. You take a crankbait and you go off and start fishing the ends of points and starting to hit the deeper stuff ticking the deeper stuff with the crankbait. Guys have got that concept down. So I think part of it is for guys to get themselves saturated. And I also say, I heard a lot of guys say, hey, look, dude, it's just a matter of confidence. And I do. I caution them to go into confidence. And the reason why is because it is one of those techniques that you have to have execution. You really do want to be thoughtful about what you're doing. And so it is a little bit more brain juice in that way. You want to be thoughtful. You want to have your calculations out. You don't cast on top of the point, for example. You cast beyond the point. Well, that seems like a simple concept when we talk about it. But you and I get in the boat. Watch us when we get to a boat dock. Watch what we do. It's our natural thing to try to hit the target, not necessarily go beyond the target, right? So there's some challenges with that. So it is a different way of thinking, if that makes sense.
And so, I listened to the one you did with Justin Clark, who is also in here, JC Dropshot. And one of the things you talked about was discipline versus confidence, right? Yes. And how it's better to be disciplined with it and understand how to fish the bait, and rather than have total confidence in it that it's going to work every time you throw it.
Yeah, we'll keep this a G-rated show, but for example. I don't know. I can't remember if I said this to Jess, and I've said it to a couple of people. So definitely slap me in the face if I'm repeating myself. But the one thing that I talk about is in regards to confidence. You know what a Golden Gloves boxer is? A 19-year-old Golden Gloves boxer. Well, if he has gotten his Golden Gloves, I assure you, he knows what he's doing. You just don't get that. That's not a certificate that gets handed to you because you smile at somebody. You really need to know your business. However, if you take that 19-year-old and you take him down, you put him in that bar at the end of the street where there's these guys that look meaner than Mr. Rudd with the beard, Okay. And it's this little seedy bar at the end of the street. He's not going to have all the confidence in the world. Those guys are scary, hairy, and their teeth are sharp. So his confidence is probably not going to be there. But however, if the poop hits the fan, he's probably going to be able to take care of himself. And that's really what I'm talking about. You can be transplanted. Once you learn how to spy bait, you can literally be transplanted to different places and have the ability to execute once you do the discipline and get the execution down. So
I think it's super interesting.
And I say you got to be good to yourself on this, because some days I've gone out and I can't do anything wrong and I catch them spy baiting. I mean, I could throw it over my back and for some reason I catch them. Other days I may go all day and only get 1 or 2 bites. But for me, it's the same, because I've finally got around the curve. For me, it's the same. Whether I only get 2 to 5 bites, or whether I get 150 bites, it's really the same. My execution is still the same. My process is still the same. The thing is I know eventually I'm going to get bit. Now, whether or not that's the right technique or not could weigh in definitely. I know we're going to talk about it, but we were a buddy of mine who's fished the U.S. Open, I don't know, 13 or 14 times. He's almost won one. So this is a stick. This is a guy that knows what he's doing. But we went out and we were doing some fishing with the Apex Tune, which is a lipless vibration bait that I brought to market. We'll talk about that later. But during that time, the water visibility was actually poor. It was for the West, 18 inches, 15 inches. So yeah, that's the beautiful little bait. I promise you. You could drop your lure into the water and it would disappear, about 15, 18 inches, somewhere in there, it would just disappear. So we actually started spy baiting, and he was like, man, I really need to do this. And I said to him, it's going to be hard to catch fish spy baiting because it's not actually ideal. I would be looking for something a little bit, but I said, we will catch fish doing this. And so we set up, and I didn't know what color choices at the time because I just got on that water, but I put 3 colors out: a natural, a reflective, and then kind of an opaque, kind of a little bleached out color. And I put those 3 in front of me, and I started casting and reeling in the water, and I paid attention to how the bait looked to me in the water. And so the natural pattern looked really natural, especially once I could see it, but I knew that pattern and the profile was going to fade once it got into the deeper water. So I wasn't going to get, they weren't going to be able to really focus in on that. But I fished it anyways, and I caught like one fish off of it. And he was real excited. Man, we got one. That's a nice fish. And I said, well, we're not dialed in yet. I could figure that, and again, this is because of my time doing this, that we probably weren't going to it's not going to line up real well. And then I moved to the opaque color. We caught a couple fish. And then I moved and I started testing the reflective color. And that one in particular was a river bait. I think I even have one here, a river bait pattern. But I started fishing, and I could tell immediately, because of my experience, that was going to be the color. We went on and we caught, I don't know, 12 or 13 fish in this one area, spy baiting, which really could have been done with a more effective technique for the time of year and what the fish were doing. But we turned it in and turned it out in just that, I don't know, in that couple hours doing that. So again, it really does have its power. In that particular situation, we were looking at what pattern was going to be best, what colorway was going to actually be best for this particular condition and time frame.
Yeah, so I'm curious, just like if you could say, okay, these are your ideal conditions or ideal time of year, kind of give like the basics of when you should be throwing it or what you should be looking for a guy that has never thrown a spy bait before.
Yeah. So I won't tell you about the time that I caught the fish at night on it. I won't go into that. that'll throw everybody for a mad curve. But I'm being facetious. But the point is you're absolutely right. You want to kind of concentrate to your strengths of doing this. If you fish river systems, then you want to be able to read the river. If you fish lakes, you want to be able to read your lake. So you do want to get as adept to that as possible. But the ideal situation for spy baiting is most likely clear water conditions or clearer water conditions where you have visibility at a distance. And the reason why is because suspended fish have a 360-degree radius, they don't have to worry about anything. Their visual windows are huge because they can sit away from stuff and look left to right or turn left to right, versus if they were backed up into a hydrilla patch, or they were tucked into the tight corner against the shore of a dock, or in a shade pocket. Those places give those fish maybe advantages, but their windows of visibility are limited. When a fish moves out on just the main lake, for example, he can now, or she can now, see great distances, and she can see up, down, sideways very well. And if she has to adapt, change position, it's so quick. It's just a turn of the fin and she's looking the other way. So that plays into favor for spy baiting. We don't have to be necessarily right up on the fish for the fish to spot it. But if we do have an idea where the fish are and we can sneak that lure into that zone, by the time the lure gets there, there's all these little stimulus factors that take place, and they have to start reacting categorically to those stimulus factors. Either I'm not interested, or I'm kind of interested. And that's why, I've talked about the four or five different actions on a spy bait. But really the key is to probably have some water clarity, and then stable water. Stable water meaning that it could be moving water current, but it's stable. It's not erratic. It's not dropping or rising. It's not having a bunch of sediment come in for a half a mile and then dropping off, and no sediment, suspended sediment, that kind of stuff. But where you get kind of those stable conditions are really good. And then when conditions just get tough in clear water, so things slick off, bluebird skies, and bait fish tend to be smaller class fish. Those are sometimes when the bass actually will pay attention to the spy bait. So I would say stable, clear conditions are going to work in your favor doing this. Now, again, if we're talking about early year, like pre-spawn, and those conditions exist pre-spawning, there may be a better way to catch quality fish. It may be a jig, on the end of a point versus a spy bait. But if you are versed with spy baiting, you can add that to your repertoire. That could be either right there. And is he mad at me?
Okay. He's mad at everyone.
I think Murphy was born mad at the world, so you're fine.
So you could apply it, but yeah, I would say stable, clear conditions. Now, with that being said, I can't tell you the amount of fish I put in the boat, when it's been overcast. One guy told me, well, what happens if the wind, starts cracking the surface up? It's not the end of the world. I can talk a little bit about that. The surface layer, when the wind hits, actually turns into patterns, and you get these cross-section patterns above you. And so things aren't as visible. Light starts to reflect different directions. You don't get as much penetrability. So there's all these other little factors that take place when just the wind starts to put breeze on. Oops, excuse me. And so when that happens, that can change how that lure is going to look because of the amount of light that can't penetrate. It actually gets reflected. So in slick conditions, it becomes a wide open target up there by itself. It's known that it's traveling, and it's just a matter of whether or not the fish want that particular bait or not. So it just gets to be easier when those situations happen, especially when the fish are feeding, or you call it like looking up versus feeding down. When the fish are really chasing minnows, well, they're kind of looking for that opportunity. So that's when it turns to be can be a striking improvement in your presentation. But with that being said, clear water and surface breaking up and having wind is absolutely okay. I put big fish in the boat doing that. I'm doing some things maybe a little bit different. Maybe I'm actually closer to the bottom when I'm retrieving it. Maybe I'm not sitting up 3 feet from the surface. Let's just say we're in 20 foot of water and I'm only fishing 10 feet. Maybe when the cloud cover's there, I may fish a little bit tighter at the bottom. I'll explore that mid-depth, but I'll fish down towards the bottom.
It's so fascinating to hear you say that, because it's something that I've noticed with the spy bait, that when it's cloudier or when the surface is broke up, I want to fish deeper.
Yeah. And
like that's where the fish seem to kind of want to eat that bait. But I never realized it until you said it, that there was a connection there.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating, because one of the biggest bags of spots that I ever caught on a lake that's predominantly spots was overcast, kind of cloudy, windy kind of day, and I was fishing where the dock cables actually connected to the bottom, and that's where those fish were suspended. They were suspended around those dock cables, and it's just fascinating to hear you say that. I guess I never actualized it until you verbalized it. You know what I mean? That's fascinating.
or when I think out loud, I guess.
Yeah, right.
Which can be dangerous sometimes. The other thing, you know, I remember when I was first introducing it, and I introduced it in a pretty tight construct. And the reason was I wanted guys to be very successful at it. There's just so much to think about spy baiting. So I gave kind of the basic kind of core presentation so that guys, would be able to elaborate from there. If you fish in a part of the United States that is predominantly cloud cover, you don't have to abandon the technique because there's no there's no clear skies, right? So you kind of do have to make your adaptation. But I remember sitting down with a group of anglers, and some of them were some pros, and they were like, well, XYZ tournament isn't gonna, it's gonna be cloudy this tournament, so I guess probably shouldn't even look at that. But man, I caught him the other day doing it, and I'm like, no, you want to eliminate that factor. I don't know, because I'm not with you, I'm not on that lake, but definitely if you've got big sacks of fish spy baiting, just because the cloud comes over doesn't mean that you stop spy baiting. It means you start looking at what micro adjustments you may need to make. It may be just a color change, for example. It may just be the position to where that lure needs to be. And to probably support that, you guys remember in 2017, a very famous angler knocked it out of the park with over 90 pounds of bass. His day 3 and day 4 side of his elite tournament. And he'd been on that water for 25 years. So this isn't a beginner. This is an expert. He went in and knocked it out of the park, catching spy baiting helped him day 3 and day 4 to come to a total of like 90 pounds, 1 ounce or something like that for his weekend. That's pretty impressive. I think he walked away with $100 grand. That's pretty quick. I mean, that's pretty nice.
And his name just might be Kevin. I'm not sure. Yeah. Maybe something like that.
And I got to congratulate him. But the cool thing was watching him in the moment. Honestly, that was the biggest thing for me. That was probably, I don't know if I want to say I was a proud papa, but I mean, it really was a cool deal, because it was like watching a 7-year-old kid in a candy store. I say this 1,000 times, but it really was. It wasn't really his way of fishing, but he's so dang good that he can make those adaptations. And when he did, it was almost like it kept him on this edge of success and defeat within 2 heart strokes. You could see it on his face. Oh, I better not. Oh, that's a big fish. I hope I don't lose it. To, I've got another one. You could just watch all these emotions start to pour out. So I got a kick out of it personally. I just thought it was awesome. But I get to live vicariously through you guys every once in a while.
So let's kind of introduce the different sizes of spy baiting, right? Because I think a lot of people see, okay, you have now maybe the 60s out places. You have the 80 G-Fix, 90. You have this Alpha 72 and the 100, right? And so there's like all these different types of spy baits, but really it's not so much different. It's just the different kind of applications, right? So now you have the 80, which is really a spinning setup sort of spy bait, 80 G-Fix, kind of that crossover where you can still fish it on spinning setup, fish it on some bait casting gear. So kind of like you have the 90, which is like that size, predominantly bait caster, but you can fish it on spinning setup, a little bit bigger size, and then the 100, which is the biggest, right?
So we have our what we call our I-class series is a revision of our spin baits that were primarily to target the tournament anglers, and then we added one more into that queue. So it's called all new I-class series, and that's designed to have bulletproof reinforcements on the front end and the back end of the bait, so the bait has a tremendous amount of reliability. We also were able to sneak in some extra performance characteristics to the bait and actually get the bait to be even more sinuous. It casts a little bit further, so trajectory was another thing that we were able to hit. So we hit some performance aspects, kind of just increasing the athleticism of the lure and doing it in a way that now made the lure bulletproof as well. So we were excited about doing that process. In that, So in that all new I-Class series, you have the 80 G fix, the 72, which was kind of a new bait, you know, about a year and a half ago. You have the 90 and you have the 100. The lures that I recommend for the spinning setup, and I fish spinning setup most of the time. Actually, I actually throw all of them on a spinning rod every once in a while, but I throw them on bait casters too, just so that I can help guys out. But the 80 and the 80 G fix are the two. And guys will ask me all the time, if there was one spy bait that you would use, David, what would it be? If there was one spin bait that you would use, which one would it be? And it'd be the 80 G fix by far, because I pro tuned that one to, it's the same size as the 80, but it was really designed to give the tournament angler just an extra punch of what they needed in situations, especially ever-changing situations. If you're fishing slicked off territory, and then all of a sudden the breeze starts to come in and a crosswind starts to come in, could you make those changes? Could you adjust to those changes with the 80 G fix? So with that being said, those are the two. The 80 and the 80 G fix are the spinning application. Then we go to the other side, which is what I call the bait casting application. That's the 90, the 72, and the 72, I don't have one right out in front of me, but
here's the 72 right here. So compared to the 80 G fix, it's a lot taller profile. It's shorter, like front to back, but it's a taller profile.
Right. And I always say that 72 is almost like a, well, I'll just put it this way: if you have any enemies in your neighborhood, cast the 72 at them, because it hits them, it's going to kill them. It's just a brute. It's a bully, and so there's a lot of pros that really like that like to have no nonsense kind of fishing. And I'm not going to call it Bubba fishing, but they will throw that thing like it shot out of a cannon, and they'll cover water with it, and they love that. They love that bait. That bait is actually taller and heavier, so it casts farther and it casts faster and it casts harder. So some guys are in love with that bait, that 72. The 90 was kind of one of the original staples in our lineup. It's still there. It's still there. In fact, I'm even looking at isolating that bait and considering some improvements to it. But it is the old standby. A lot of guys fish it. It was actually a spy bait or a spin bait that I would use a lot on flats, where I had fish. When I'm talking about flats, not something like a 4-foot flat that only runs 20 feet or 20 yards. I'm talking about, 4-mile kind of flats, these big, gigantic, massive flats that you'd move on to. That bait was really, really nice with a light cranking rod and bait caster, making long casts and covering the flats, where smallmouth or other bass would move up on the flats, and then from the flats they move up shallower and they start to do their bedding. You could peck off those fish, and so the 90 became a regular for me on those kind of situations. And then this year at the Bassmaster Classic, we introduced the 100. So this 100 to me looks huge. If you can imagine it, it's a huge bait to me. I don't know for this one. I think here's
the 80 compared to the 100. I mean, it's significantly larger. It's a little bit taller.
Yeah, heavier. It's exactly, and yeah, exactly. If you can look at them, I don't know if this is going to help in my angle of camera, but you can kind of see the length of them. But also, you start looking at the jewelry that's at the end of them, and it makes the profile even bigger. So. So the 100 gets into that really big size. And I was a little bit worried about that, to be honest, because when you go into using, whether it's a swim bait or whatnot, you start getting bigger, you have to start getting more realistic. And the one thing you don't want to lose is action. You don't want action to be sacrificed for profile. But it happens to be just a system of mass and weight that tends to do that. But we pulled it off. That was really kind of the cool thing. The 100 actually, maybe some people will yell at me for this, but the 100 actually has more action, more dynamic action than the 90 does. So we were able to tweak that bait and give it even a more flightier kind of look when you reel it through the water. Cool lure. And I'll let out a little tip. One evening after spy baiting, I got back onto the bank with the 100. And I just started going down these dock channels, making casts, and I was pulling the bait up on top of the surface and buzzing it along, and I caught like 6 big largemouth doing that as a buzz bait. That's for fun. And I started laughing about it because I did it a long time ago. I did it with the 80. I'd burn the 80 on top of the surface and then just punch it, let it go back down. It'd buzz along, and all of a sudden it just drops underneath the surface. And I'd catch active schooling fish sometimes doing that. That's not really spy baiting, right? But I would use it. We use that bait for everything, man. I would try to catch seagulls, lions, tigers. So, but the 100 just made it easier to do that. So I give that a tip to your viewers, that you can start to play around with the 100 early in the morning when the fish are up shallow pressing bait. You can start to do that, buzz that thing along. And where it really worked out was when I could buzz it over the top of hydrilla beds, and then where you got depressions, where you got these little depressions, I'd let it stop and I'd kill it, and that thing just shimmies into those depressions, and then I'd pull it back out. And then I'd go out to the the off ends of things and the main lake and start to really spy bait. But I had fun with that 100 and prototype for sure.
That's cool. How long, like start to finish, of like the very first spy bait? What was the prototype process? How long did that take? Because you guys go through extensive, like people that don't know, the G87 took forever for you guys.
Yeah. The making the lure itself is not the time-consuming piece. You can make a lure, or we can make a lure in Japan pretty quickly, like in hours. We can pull off a lure. So we're talking about, okay, well, I want a crankbait that has a bigger tail on it. Boom, it comes out. But it's all the other pieces that go in there, the weight, the componentry, those type of things. We need it head down. It needs to run head down. It needs to make contact with the surface, or it's those type of things. So then you start getting into ballast situations. But the actual form and getting it out to almost basic running status is like instant almost. So you'll get this basic, which gives us better time and gives us a lot more opportunity to pay attention to what we're trying to refine. So a lure in general speaking, when it first comes to concept, sometimes we can get it out the door or get it out the door being ready for the market, in 4 to 6 months, 4 months being absolutely blazing fast, 6 months being on that end. But some of the lure concepts that we've worked on have gone as far as 2.5 years. G87, for example, took a long time. That's a deep diving crankbait that has a whole bunch of technology in it. So it kind of depends. Now, after we started making spin baits, it got easier and easier once we got to like the 100 to just make these transitions. We knew we needed more weight. We knew we needed more surface area to touch water, so it got a little bit easier because we already had, base design. So honestly, I don't remember exactly how long the first one took. The second one, we got it out pretty quick as far as a concept, but then I was really adamant about testing it and making sure that we were hitting the targets. I really wanted it to be super potent, obviously, because we have competitors that are chasing our concept too. So we want to stay ahead of the game there. So that was the other reason. But really, that 80 G fix was meant to be deadly. I mean, we were trying to be outside the box with that little tiny bait. I think we pulled it off pretty well.
So one of the questions that I've seen a couple times pop through, do you tie direct to the bait? Do you use a split ring? I know some of the baits, you and I had talked in the past how like even running 6-pound or 10-pound test on like the 72 or whatever, have potential to come through the eye there. Like what is?
So we went through some changes in Duo. We moved from several different plants into one plant. We hired new people, so some of those things. And in doing that, there was some rashes of baits that didn't really perform the way that they needed to. Sometimes the screw wasn't adhering to the mounting block in the back of the bait or the front of the bait. Real simple things that once done, you don't have a problem with the lure. But if forgotten, you have a problem with the lure. And so we went through and looked at that. And out of that, Duo had come out with some different types of ways to try to solve that issue immediately. But the I-class series that we came out with really solved that. I really wanted the lure to be completely redone. The very first spin baits that we had were perfect. There was zero issues with them. But once we did all these changes and as a factory and grew and people changed, there was sometimes we get a rash of these things. So I basically took care of those issues as guys would let me know, but we focused in on that whole series to combat that, but also to upgrade the performance, really kind of shoot the lure onto another level. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
yeah. So like, are you tying direct to the bait itself? Are you using a split ring?
So okay, so what I'm getting at is that I'll use line direct. There are some of the lures that came with a split ring, and the split ring's there because that line tie is different. It's kind of oval shaped. So if you have one of the baits that have the oval shaped line tie, you should probably put a split ring on that because it's an oval shape, meaning that that wire comes back and bends back to the very back of the bait, which leaves a gap, in my opinion, that can't be really fused. And then the split ring actually utilized that. So that was another thing that I got eradicated from the spy baits. However, I have them and I use them. If you do use, and earlier, a couple of my buddies used to put a split ring on even the originals, because it freed up some of the fall or the shimmy, and they would go and throw it into like dock walls and let it shimmy down the wall, get bit, and go to the next dock wall. So that's why they were putting the split ring on. I don't use the split ring, and here's the reason why. When I start to put tension on the line and I get the lure to move at a certain rate, as soon as that rate gets faster, I can actually watch the split ring turn, and it starts to turn and lock. And once it starts to turn and lock, it turns the body, and it starts to change the body. Now, you have to get it going really fast to do that, but it actually starts to make the body list to just one side. So I don't use it. Now, if you're going really slow, there's not an issue. But if I wanted to move the bait kind of, I don't want to say moderately fast because I'm covering water with it, it would change that rocking position actually for that lure. So I shied away from any split rings. With that being said, though, the circle eyelets are the best and just in lures anyways, because you have a circle. So the line has the ability to stay even on that circle. An oval shape carries the line depending on if you cast. There's force in the lure. So now that oval shape and that line will bend and go around the oval, go to one side of the oval because of the change or the degree of that shape. So a circle to me has always been a better line tie. Now the guys in the saltwater industry use more oval shapes too, but they're also putting on heavier line. Their line is larger diameters. If you can imagine, they're using 20-pound test or 18 or 40 or 60-pound test. So that's probably where that actually suffices for them. But a circle line tie is much better. So
Detroit First commented on sort of that rear treble coming out. So I just want to kind of do a close-up of this one because this is the I-class. And the I-class model, you guys can sort of see that loop in there. That has effectively gotten rid of that treble. Like that is locked around some sort of pin in there, and your rear treble, you cannot turn this at all.
Yeah.
You can't force anything.
There's no rocking.
So
what I was going to say is in the original ones, we had a screw, which a lot of lures have. Screw in the front, screw in the back.
Yeah.
The screw mounts to an area, kind of wedges into an area. And then we have a chemical welding process. If all those things are in place, those spin baits are perfect. There's no issue with them. But if I wanted to change them, and I used to actually change them, I'd take the line tie and unscrew it, and I'd modify the lure, and then I'd glue that back in there. I loved that opportunity to do that because I'm just a weird guy and spend too much time in the basement tweaking on lures. But that gave me the opportunity to do that. I can't do that now. I can still modify, but once the modification is taken to the lure, then you pretty much have to live with it that way, where I could change these things out. So So that is no longer the case. But the good part about that is it's foolproof. It will never untwist, and it will never rock or go and move into a space where it gets compromised. So the integrity on the front and the back of the baits is phenomenal. And the other thing is a little bit more surface area there, which is allowing the prop to actually move a little bit differently. So it's giving off a different signature. So we did some things that just basically upgraded the spin bait. Yeah, it's fun.
That's awesome. So I'm curious to just kind of pick people's brains. Alex, we'll start with you, but I just want to talk about Spybait setups, right? So like the rod, reel, line, the bait, like the whole setup from what you're using to throw it on, what you would recommend for someone to throw it on if they don't want to go like dedicate a Spybait rod for it. So, sorry. I guess I'll go first. So my setup.
You may not have
kind of been.
Alex, can you hear?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, okay, there you are. There you are.
Yeah. I'm listening. I can't tell people enough and explain to them enough. Like when David starts talking, everybody just needs to shut up for a few minutes, because I take a lot of pride in understanding when I need to shut my mouth and listen to somebody who knows something about something a lot more than I do. And so when David starts talking spy baits, I kind of just zone in and I listen and I just absorb everything, because it's just good information to know. So
I'm with you. I just typically sit back and listen for the most part.
Well, yeah, no. You guys definitely, you can share your rod and reel setups. I'll definitely tell you kind of, for me.
I'm really curious to know yours, because.
Yeah, I started out, when I was testing, I started out with a very short rod, a drop shot rod. It was fast, quick, efficient. And I still tell guys to this day, a typical drop shot rod, you can get away with spy baiting. It's not the ideal, but I mean, you could go out and win a tournament with that rod. If you start to get pretty retentive like I do, then you're going to want to move to some different tool sets in order to make that happen. But a guy that tells me, listen, I don't know about you, but I'm on a budget. I get it. I tell people all the time, my first bass boat, it was pretty cool. It was a pair of used Nikes. That was my first bass boat. So I'm with you on that, definitely. So the guys that have already a set of rods and don't really, want to go out there and burn up a whole bunch of money for some spy bait rods can get away with the drop shot rod. And I always say a drop shot rod, 6-pound test, because that's kind of a measurement that we have in the U.S. In Japan, we have in-between sizes, so I can get a little bit more retentive about that. But if you get a 6-pound test, a 6.6 drop shot rod, 2,500 size reel, to 35 or 33,000 size reel, you're going to be just fine executing the technique. It's not going to be, there's not a huge piece. Where it may pay off to have a more sophisticated spy bait rod is when you're on big water, like Lake St. Clair, for example, open water, windy water, because at that point in time, the longer rods give me the ability to mend my line. I know that may sound weird. It sounds normal in fly fishing, but we do it all the time as bass anglers. We're mending our line all the time. We may rip it up, lift it off, drop it, reset it. We may pull it out. Like when I spy bait, sometimes I'll make a long cast and I drop my rod tip in the water and I open up my bail, obviously, and I pull the line. I let the water grab the line where my rod tip meets, and I pull the line out and I pull out an extra 10 feet. And I can't see maybe all the way out there where I made my cast. I can't watch that line because maybe it's gray light, but I can look down at the side of my boat and I can watch that line sink. Sinking, meaning the line by the boat stays on the surface. It hasn't broken surface tension, but the line over by where I cast it has already started down. And as that lure starts to shimmy down, a fish bites that lure or grabs it. My line next to my boat, which is being inserted into the surface tension or underneath the surface, right where that insertion takes place, it'll stop. And I can tell that a fish bit or I have a fish on by looking off to the side of my boat, watching the line. So that's a way that I mend line, because in gray light or stormy conditions, I can't see out that far in front of me. I don't have eagle eyes to do that. So I'll mend my line at the side of the boat, count my sinking rate down, and then watch my line. If my line is on the surface and it starts moving to go into the water and it stops, then I know I've got a fish on, and I can pick up the line from there and start doing what I need to do. So it gives me an indicator. And I know that's weird, you guys. I know it's weird, but
that's amazing. I never thought of that ever. Like, I'm like cast out, I start counting, leave my bail open, count, and I'm like, okay. And then I start reeling, and some fish jumps 40 feet out where my spybait landed. I'm like, oh, I got one. You know, like that's kind of my indicator.
Well, that's a good one too. That's actually a good visual for sure. That's good. You know, but yeah. So I guess 6 pound test line is a really good finesse line size. I remember when drop shotting first came about, guys were saying, I don't drop shot with anything but 10 pound. And I was like, okay, you're definitely from Texas. But then I was watching guys turn around and say, well, 8 pound is way too much. And now guys are drop shotting with what? 6, 7, 6, 4. There's some guys are out there drop shotting. I actually fished a FLW tournament with 2.5 pound test drop shotting.
He's out there with ice line. Like.
Woo!
Now I had rods to do that with, but what I was doing was taking away the fish's ability to see the whole profile of the lure and the line. Bigger line can also blend into the lure. So, and what happens is light hits the line and it gets a streaking. So you get kind of like this blur in the line when the light hits it. So the bigger diameters show that up more. So now all of a sudden what is 5 inches, your lure now becomes 15 inches because it shows up in light. So your profile actually increases. So sometimes to defute that, you go with smaller diameters, but 6 pound is a great finesse line. And it's actually, with a drop shot rod, it's actually pretty difficult to break, honestly. I mean, you have to really kind of be a nasty, mean old guy to break 6 pound line on drop shot. Like you know, setting the hook like you would want to jig a jig fish. I mean, you have to do some crazy things to make that happen. But if you just manage your fish and set the hook with a sweep, do those type of things, you're not gonna have a problem. So 6 pound test gives you the ability to be stealthy. That rod is a good starting out rod, and like I said, if you don't ever get a spybait rod, you're okay. You'll be able to survive in the game. I moved to my recommendations for guys that are serious into spybait. I moved to at least a 7.6, and the reason why a 7.6 gives you again that ability to mend and do some other things with your line. You pick up the line, you can drop the line really quickly. You know, like in windy conditions, I always tell guys when you're spybaiting, make the long cast and drag the bait for a second and insert your rod tip into the water and break the surface tension. Get the fluorocarbon to go underneath the water, because if it sits on top of the water and doesn't break, you got wave action on windy days, and that kind of keeps the lure there. And so what you thought was 3 seconds of depth all of a sudden doesn't happen. So, you know, that's a variable.
Crazy.
So fall rates can be instantly diffused by a windy day. So to help get you into having more of an advantage in that situation, it is to make the long cast and then just drag your rod tip down, let the line cut the surface, and now you're fine. Everything's back underneath the surface and it's calm, cool, and collected, and you can do your thing. Really important, and it becomes even more important if you fish current. Like I spybait in the current, so I'll cast up current and let the lure come down the current. I make a natural presentation. It depends on the rate and speed of the water to my retrieve, but I'm going to make that lure look really natural coming down the current. But to do that, I've got to get the line down there. I've got to get everything lined out. So I'll cut surface tension a little bit harder and faster. Then I got everything in place to do that. So, and reels, again, you don't need anything really special. I always say a reel that has a good drag. So whatever company you want to use, it's fine with me. It should be fine with you, but your drag is important. And some guys are going to hate me for saying this. Again, this is only my opinion, so I respect other people's opinions. You know, guys used to talk a lot about back reeling. Well, I did a lot of work around back reeling. I don't back reel anymore, ever, because the back reel to release the line, I only got a certain amount of inches in a certain amount of time. What I did notice about bass and other fish, they can move in less than a second, some of them in a burst of over 12 feet. That's a lot of inches of line. So what I'm getting at is that for back reeling, to me, I can't catch that fish. So I tend to shy away from that type of, but some guys live and die by that, which is A-okay. I want, if that fish takes off, and you guys have caught the fish spy baiting before where you got handcuffed, you're reeling along and all of a sudden there's a little bit of slack in the line, you start reeling, you're like, what was that slack? And then bzzz, and they take off. You don't have time to do anything else at that point. You can't. So it really is the drag. And if the drag is set right and releases smoothly, then you have tension that's fighting that fish, and you want some tension on that fish throughout the whole fight. And that's where a soft action rod helps. And that's where a drag really helps. I always tell guys to how to set their equipment up. So let's say you got the right reel for what you like, you got the right rod for what you want to do, and you got the right pound test. Go out to the backyard, take your lure, hook it on the fence, walk out 40 feet or 60 feet, turn to the side and start reeling up with your drag tight. Reel up your line until your rod doubles over to the point it looks like it's going to break. You almost feel uncomfortable. Your line, your 6-pound line is stretching. Your rod is doubled up, or what I call taco effect, and it is bending to the point that it's going to break, it looks like, or feels like. And then at that point, start to slowly loosen your drag. So you're just slowly loosening your drag until you get an even slow slip. What you're doing is, if you take that out in the field now with you, you can adjust your situation quickly. It's just a twist of the dial, left or right, just a quarter turn, and your drag is set all the way it needs. Also, you put all the rod into the fight of that fish. And that's really important. We've talked about that. You want to keep the fish tethered. I call it tethering. And it basically is this rubber band effect that wherever the fish goes, they're tethered. They're on this rubber band versus a hard line and then a loose line, which gives them the opportunity to free themselves way more effectively. So that type of situation will actually help you also not lose fish. I used to get some of the elite pros. Man, I hooked the biggest smallmouth in my whole life I've ever. It was a 5.5 or it was a 6.5. I watched the thing jump out, and the spin bait went one way and it went another way. And then it happened 3 more times to me, David. And then I asked them what their rod is. And this is not always the case, but a lot of times they were using a very, very stiff drop shot rod, a really, really stiff one. And so they got into complications. That stiff rod doesn't like to bend, really. And when you do get it to bend, guess what it wants to do? It wants to unbend very fast. So it doesn't want to stay incorporated during the fight. So now something has to give. It has to give in force, power, structure. It's going to have to give. Maybe the hooks are going to tear free because there's too much tension. With the rod that doubles up and works to flex, everywhere that fish goes and swims, he's fighting against. It's kind of like your little brother hanging onto your shirt tail, and you have to run 100 meters. That's painful. That would be painful. So that's what you're trying to do for that fish to get him to fill his little blood vessels up with nitrogen as quick as possible.
Yeah, and so the rubber band effect, and we had talked about it a little bit. Essentially, this concept that if you hook a rubber band to a hook, right, and you pull on it, it may not penetrate, but as long as that rubber band can flex and move where that hook is going, like, it's a lot harder to pull out. But if you hook a rope, even if it's penetrated, if you pull it too far, all you're going to do is either tear or break something, right?
And there's this situation once things lock out, something has to give. Once things lock out and hit their max, something has to give. So if you have a rod that always gives during the time, this flexion, then you're allowing yourself a huge chance. Now, you still got to get the hooks in them, and that gets into hook set. And a lot of guys, I tell guys, when you do the hook set, it's not swinging real quickly off to the side and then starting to reel. It's not that. You want to set the hook, even if you have to back up off your deck a little bit, don't fall out of the boat, but you want to set the hook and then start reeling and stay on that fish, reeling as much as possible. You want the rod to actually go back to the water and grab. So I'll put it in a better sequence for you. I'm reeling along and I get bit. At the point that I get bit, I'm not going to go this way. I'm actually going to start reeling into the fish and eating up all the line. You'd be amazed how much line you can eat up to help get that tether in a better position. So you start really, really quickly eating up that line. And then remember, your drag is going to give if your rod doubles up. So you don't have to worry about that. And then you start to pull those hooks into the fish, and the rod starts to bend dramatically, and the reel will release line if it needs to. And at that point, now you have the hooks driving, pulling into the fish, and you have that line and that rod managing the fish while you're in it. If you just go here, what happens is you pulled out 3 to 6 feet of slack, possibly, and may have not ever got the hooks into the fish because there was nothing driving the hooks into the fish. So I've seen guys do that, boom, and then they're kind of reeling. And sometimes those fish are caught because those hooks are actually really sharp, but sometimes they get caught, especially if it's on the outside of the face. But you want to reel up to the fish and then slide the hooks in and then fight and manage that fish. And losing those fish a lot of time. Remember, you're casting a 3-inch bait that weighs 3/8 of an ounce on the base side, over 120 feet probably. That's a long ways out there. So you want to eliminate that stretch. If me and you took, if Alex and I took some monofilament, went across the street. I said, Alex, you go across the street. I'll stand on the other side. And we wrapped that monofilament in our hands and we headed across the street. Alex could walk another 15 to 35% further than the length of the line that we have across the street. That's how much stretch is in some lines. So not all of them. Braid, for example, doesn't stretch that way. But what I'm getting at is that's the potential. Now, if I'm having 30% stretching and I'm still reeling, that's a lot of reeling I got to do. Right. And so fluorocarbon does stretch a little bit. It goes into elongation rate, and then it also goes into deforming at that point. But you want to make sure while it is being stressed that you're taking up all that slack to make that happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've talked about hooks. Okay. So you talked about hooks just briefly. One of the biggest comments that I get all the time on my channel when I fish a duo bait is how good the hooks are. So are there duo hooks, right?
Yeah, so the hooks are actually made by a private company for us specifically. It is my goal to bring out the hooks and to offer them to the public, the anglers, as packages. I'm trying to do that. It's a little bit tricky to do that because you pre-order your hooks for lure assembly and some other things. So it takes some logistical pieces, and then you got to think about packaging and stuff. But it'd be worthy to do that because the anglers, especially spy baiting, you get into some areas, you know, I've caught as many as 120 fish in a session, you know, from keeper size all the way up to 4 pounds or whatnot. And those hooks are going to get tired. They have to. I mean, it's just law. So if I was practicing and I'm catching fish or bumping into cover, doing something at tournament time, I want to change those hooks out, right? So I definitely change my hooks out at tournament time. So it behoove us to try to make some replacements available. But that hook is called nano coating. It's basically your mom's like a Teflon on her pan. Well, that's basically what it is. It's just micronized, and they make it so it's so just like Teflon, super slick. So the grams per force for that penetration is significantly less. You know, one of the very first companies to ever take that into consideration, and it wasn't nano coated hook at the time, but it was Daiichi. Daiichi had made a very, very sharp hook called the X Point. I don't know if you guys ever remember it. It was a hard wire, but a thin wire hook. But the penetrability at the time was 7 times faster than all the other hooks on the market at that time back in the day. So which really put them way ahead as far as technology. Now things have changed since, but in my opinion, it's still a great hook, but it's an excellent hook. But things have changed. Now they're going into this coated material, which is amazing, and more companies are doing that. But that nano coating does help tremendously. I joke about this. You could throw those hooks at your buddy and they'll stick on them. You know, it's like Velcro. And the funny thing is I had some Japanese guys. Every once in a while, some of the Japanese guys fly over to Spybait with me. They want to learn about it. I had one Japanese friend who was arguing about Nico rigging versus Spybaiting, and so he said, well, I'm going to Nico rig and you're going to Spybait, and I'm going to show you the Nico rig is far superior. And the Nico rig is actually a great way to fish. It really is. The only problem is he didn't realize that when he set the dates for Spybaiting, it really kind of catered to Spybaiting. So I let him cheat for me, and we caught more Spybait fish than we did Nico rig fish. But yeah, I mean, it's what I'm getting at is the hooks were so sharp in that session that we'd catch a fish and the fish would jump at you, and usually you hit your hand, nothing happened. These things were hooking and penetrating in his hand every time he was just around the fish. I mean, it was like the hooks were looking for him, like, oh, I can't wait till he comes over here. The poor guy got hooked like 3 times. So I was doing some operative care at that point in time on his poor fingers, and it doesn't take much at all for them to slip in there. They're it's a very good hook. There is if you have the older generations, a blue tinted hook on your Spybait, that hook, it was a good light wire hook, but you really have to pay attention to that hook because it's soft. The material is soft. So if that hook bumps against a rock a bunch, you want to take a file out and you just want to cut off just chip off the ends of it and make that point back. Just with a file, just kind of shave off the ends and make a point back. You don't want to take a lot of meat off of it, and you can continue using that hook. But that one is significantly different than the hook that we have now. And then the hook before that blue one was a hardened carbon hook, which was really good hook. That was a really good hook too. But again, if the hook point hit something, it ended up bending like right then and there, and so you had to shave off that bend and get it back into action. These hooks tend to shy away from that, and I think mostly it's just because they're slippery. If they're on end, and they'll slide on things even when they're going to penetrate. So it's a pretty nifty little deal. I wish I said I thought of that. I didn't.
So I want to talk about using a Spybait in situations where maybe a Spybait wouldn't be considered the best tool to use, or using a Spybait in strange ways, right? I've experimented with some stuff around me just because, you get curious. I have quite a few lakes where fish like to wolf pack, and it is nearly freaking impossible to get them to bite anything that isn't live bait. And I've found a ton of success, like you said earlier, not burning a Spybait or fishing it like a topwater, but definitely fishing it in that first, third of the column, and fishing it really fast, faster than you would normally fish it, or fishing it over grass beds. That's another, you were talking about that earlier as well. There's these massive expanses of grass flats, in some of the lakes that I fish, river systems, stuff like that, and just working that Spybait over that grass at a pretty quick click, right? I mean, that Spybait's really moving. Like what? So, and like you were talking about earlier, I use a drop shot rod. That's what I use for my Spybaits, right? I'm kind of one of those guys that I don't want to invest solely into a whole Spybait setup because it's a tool in my arsenal. It's not a sole tool for me. Right. But like I found a ton of success doing those different kinds of things. But is there anything like in particular that you would suggest that would make it more efficient, in those areas? Like, is there a certain bait? Because usually I'm using the just original 80 size is my favorite one to use. Is there anything different maybe with some of these new baits, or anything with rods and reels technique?
Yeah, well, just on the topic of chasing bait, it's really interesting. Sometimes depending on the lakes and reservoirs you are fishing and the pressure that they have, folks don't realize, like I'll go back to Guntersville. Guntersville is probably one of the most bass pressured lakes in the world. I mean, there is 10 tournaments on it on Friday, and then another 10 on Saturday. I mean, it is unbelievable, and that goes all year long. So sometimes those bass really key on the bait size. And what I'm getting at is profile. And so I always like to think about profile when I fish. Sometimes it has nothing to do with it, because I'll have a buddy in the boat and he throws a jig, and that jig looks like it's 12 inches long, and he catches way more fish than I do. So but profile, I think, especially when you're chasing schooling fish, is important. As the more natural you look, the more less offensive you look, the more that you can bring notice to just a little bit of behavior, and then everything goes quiet again. Those fish have the keen visibility to chase that bait down. So you just want to, maybe when you're going after schooling fish, just show them the bait. That's it. And then everything else gets quiet again and really natural. So if you're a guy that uses monofilament, I'll tell you one way to do that is you can start to create what I call a background on your line. You can take a marker, paint it blue, green, and then gray or black, and you do this sequence in your line, and it'll break up the line against the surface, I mean against the topography behind you or the cover behind you. So if you're fishing places that the bait are schooling and it's a lot of grass and stuff, that line disappears. It disappears really well because you've broken it up as far as its color. So if you're a monofilament guy, that's the way to do that. Other words, I use fluorocarbon. The other thing I do too is I look at the profile of the lure. If that lure, for example, looks like a lit up, I joke about this, but looks like a lit up Christmas tree in 8 foot of water, and everything else around me doesn't, I've missed it. You know, I missed it. So sometimes I pay a lot of attention to that, which means that what I end up doing is I'll take a black marker or Sharpie and I'll pull the bait and I'll look at the bait. And if I showed you this, I don't have one in front of me, but if I black out the blades and the split ring on the front and the line tie, I do the front and the back and I black it out, and then I hold that bait up to the stock one. The bait that I modified actually looks like an inch shorter. That's how dramatic you can change the profile.
And you actually told me that tip one year. We were standing talking, and you suggested that to me. And one of the lakes around me, very, very pressured, ton of fishing pressure, very small. And the bass this time of year especially will start feeding on those little glass minnows. I mean, so tiny that, you know, and they're almost translucent, but somehow, like you say, the bass can key on them, on them, right? Hyper aware of what's going on around them. And I actually did the Sharpie trick and took one of the, I forgot what color it is. It's an almost translucent color. And it shortened it up. And I went from getting some bites to getting a lot of bites. And it's just because that profile on that 6-pound test fluoro, you know, fishing a really long leader, very non-intrusive, very just passive, but all at the same time, it was doing just enough that it looked like what they wanted. It's just fascinating that little detail really helps to catch fish. And
it does. And I noticed that in a couple reservoirs where the predator fish were so keyed on the bait, and the bait was only a ½ inch. There was nothing I had in my tackle box that worked. I actually went to a tackle store and bought a bunch of crappie jigs and played around with them to match the bait size because they were so fixed on the bait. So you want to tighten up the profile when you feel that the fish are being that discriminatory. You do want to tighten up the profile. Another thing that you can do too that I do is I actually can pass light through my lures. And so the way that I do that to make a lure look more translucent, and I'll be talking about this in a video, but is actually to take the top layer of the color that's on your very top of your bait and remove it. And you can do that with just a straight edge on a pair of scissors. And you just basically scrape the top of the lure off. And now you take that top coating off, you take the clear coat and then the color coat off, and it actually will illuminate the inside of the cavity of the bait and make it much more natural. Those are some things that I've done over the years just for my own fishing, my crazy man fishing. But by doing that, I actually changed the profile. Again, if I lay that bait up against the next bait, you're going to see it's dramatically different in size, even though the plastic forms are exactly the same.
Wow. Fascinating.
In 2012 or whatnot, I did a video called Essentials to Spybaiting 1. And I did another one, Essentials to Spybaiting 2. And I think in both videos, I snuck something into that video in the very beginning because I wanted to just see who would catch on right away. And what I did is I put a feather on one, and I put what I call strand material on another, which kind of looks like a feather. in the back of the bait. The strand material actually works to pull the hook up into position. But it's like a feather basically. And I put that in the videos to see how many people would actually grab onto it. And for a long time they didn't. Later, a manufacturer did, so, a competitor did. But what was interesting was when I was doing that, the reason why I used that feather was a couple different reasons. I used the feather versus the strand hair. The strand hair actually comes through the water without very much resistance. The feather actually grabs water. So when I use the feather, I use the feather to almost work as a parachute. It would hold the bait out and slow the bait down, causing drag. The feather gets saturated and it just drags behind the lure, and I could slow the whole lure down. Sure, I used it as a trigger point as well, visual trigger point, but I was using it to just drag water, and I could slow the lure down dramatically just depending on how much feather I put tied onto the back of the hook.
See so that's crazy. So like I never thought of it that way. I was like, so one of my biggest problems I was having was the fish would just get that like one hook on the back treble, right?
Yeah.
But the second that I added a little marabou to the back, it would be like maybe they get an extra treble in their mouth, or maybe they get it just a little bit better. It doesn't necessarily change the entire way they eat the bait.
Yeah.
But I never thought of it from the perspective that they're actually slowing the bait down, maybe giving that fish just an extra half, I don't even know, millisecond to come up behind that bait and get it. That's crazy.
Bass have a unique visual acuity. They are a predator, and most predators have the ability to capture movement. I don't train right now, but I used to train dogs quite a bit, and these dogs were called sentry dogs. They would escort a person to and from premises. They protect the person. They guard your jewelry or your car. If you were SWAT or police, you utilize these dogs to do entries and building searches. But the dog had different drives. One drive was what I call a threat drive, and another drive was more territorial, kind of territorial dominance drive, and then another one was prey drive. The threat drive also could kind of tear off into defense drive. Well, if the dog worked in defense, it really was a stressful life for that dog. That means everything was a fight. If I could get the dog to work off of prey only, the dog lived a lot longer and could work and do a lot of work and do a lot of work for you. What I'm getting at is the animals, bass are predators, so they have this high prey drive. And that high prey drive really makes their vision more important. They track movement in great details. So just you adding the feather on the back of your hook is brilliant. It's not always necessary, but if you found like you're hitting a wall on certain things, that change may be just what you need. I even tell guys, don't do a lot of this, but then take a tiny piece of like hologram stencil kind of, and just put one strand in there, not a whole bunch, because if you put a whole bunch in there, you're getting back to a profile and a visual thing. If you put one in there, that one is going to move, and it's going to cause, in that feather, it's going to cause a little bit more of a visual thing that triggers the fish to look even further into that hook. So now you've got a little bit of the hologram, you know, kind of like has a little bit of reflective material, right? It looks like a rainbow, but it twists and turns in water, and that tiny little flicker can sometimes even attract the fish to fix on that tail feather even better. So cool. So you did. I think you did the right thing about adding the feather. And I'll tell you the truth to your listeners. I don't do that often. Honestly, I have 5 spin baits with feathers on them. That's it. And I have 200 spin baits. So, you know, it tells you that it's not absolutely necessary, but I do have it there just in case I'm going to need to change things up a little bit. So I definitely do some modifications, but I hardly use them. It is really cool when they do work. I get tickled about that. You made the modification, then you also see the results of your efforts. That's really cool. But it's not necessary for a guy to go out and have to figure out he's going to have to modify everything in order to go fishing right out of the box. In fact, I talk about this. Guys will say to me all the time, well, what color should I get? And I say, pick a natural color. Maybe 2. Pick a natural color for the bottom and pick a natural color for the water column. So that I would do that, and then pick a reflective color. And then after that, pick a kind of opaque color, something like a chartreuse shad or pro glue, ghost or something like that. That's kind of white, milky, for those overcast situations, or for late night or early morning situations. You can catch fish that you probably wouldn't catch on a chartreuse shad when it's still dark and you're on the water. Getting on the water, maybe you're fishing a little bit early, you can catch some fish that you wouldn't have caught. Once the sun comes up, or I call when the sun kind of crests or starts to just break the hillside, I may use a reflective pattern even in clear water, because that's the first thing the bass are going to see, the sun hitting the light on the surface, and I'm bringing that little bait through and it reflects. They sometimes want to go over there and get that bait early morning. I don't stay with that reflective pattern the whole day unless it's just conducive, and that's what they're eating, and that's the kind of they're chasing the bait. And then I have the natural patterns, because, and I'd say 2 natural patterns versus 1, because one you can like a ghost minnow is a great example. The ghost minnow, you can put it in a water column and it looks pretty natural on its own, that pattern, right? And it's among all different lures. It just looks really natural in midwater. And then a color that would look natural that would kind of blend into the bottom. The funny thing is, I introduced the Great Lakes series, which had perch, smelt, and it had goby. If you look at the goby pattern, it's pretty dramatic. I mean, there's spots, high, low colors in there. I mean, it really does look like a goby. That was the pattern that sold the least. Except now it's the most wanted pattern, because guys finally figured out, I'm going to use this near the bottom where the goby are, and I'm going to stroll along the bottom and catch bass that are focusing on goby. So now I've got guys that are like, hey man, do you have any more of those gobies? And I don't. They come out once a year or something in special production. But it was really interesting because the lures were set out there, and everyone gravitated towards the perch, which I probably would have too, and they gravitated towards the smelts. But the goby, they just left it alone. That thing sat on the end of the corner of a bus stop, man, and no one touched it for weeks.
I think that's funny because I actually talked to a buddy who fishes St. Clair quite a bit. He bottom traces like constant. That's his favorite way to fish a spybait, is bottom trace. So let it go to bottom, pop his rod tip to get it to come up just a little bit, and then just slow turn. And he loves that.
It really is. There's a couple guys. One guy on my pro staff, Mike Mueller, he fishes the FLW. He's what I call one of those professional co-anglers. Gary Hawaguchi, who holds more co-angling records than anybody in the nation. I mean, by far. In fact, no one will be able to duplicate his record set because they've changed the format too. But I mean, he not only won tour stuff, he was winning coastal stuff and co-angler of the year. But anyways, his resume is super long on the co-angler side. So he would sit in the back of the boat and spybait. And he figured out really quick, man, if I can spybait towards the bottom and actually stroll that thing along the bottom, I can pick up fish, that these other guys are missing. And he would he'd load the boat sometimes. So that's a great way to do it for sure.
So I got to run and put the baby to bed. Stay on here. Talk to guys about how to get into spybaiting. So how do you actually build the discipline to spybait? Because you and I have talked about it, but I think it's a really interesting way to get people to catch fish on it and understand how to stick with it. And then I want to talk about the apex. So I'll be right back.
Well, folks, Alex knows how to spybait, so I don't have to show him anything. He's got it down. But I will say this: when you're starting out, you really do want to be stubborn about it, and for a number of reasons. I said it earlier. It is the easiest, most difficult technique to do. And that alone separates it from going down the bank with a spinnerbait or throwing a topwater or doing those kind of things. It really already puts the odds against you, at least in interest. I remember when it was first started, guys were saying, this is the most boring thing I've ever done in my life, David. Are you serious? Does this really catch fish? And maybe they were just used to power fishing, or maybe they finesse fish differently, but there was some truth to it. It's a very static presentation. You're kind of sitting there not moving and doing your thing. And if you have the mindset, if you change your mindset and say, this is what I'm going to do, you're going to have half the battle won. The other thing is, don't take spy baiting over to Alaska and try to fish it over there if all your fish that you caught was in Guntersville in Alabama. Go to Guntersville, Alabama. Fish those high populated areas that you've already fished and you've already had experience in. And I'm not saying this for confident measure. I'm saying it so that you can start to do an analysis. You can actually go in and to start to ascertain when these fish start to focus in on that bait. And another thing is you're already an expert there. So fish your familiar waters where you have caught fish before and experiment there. And you may say to me, well, David, where I fish for, I've caught 100 fish on this one bank, but there's stand-up trees and there's giant boulders. And it's okay. That's all right. Now learn how to position that lure. Which takes me into the next thing is the lure has treble hooks on it. So you run those treble hooks up against a rock or a piece of wood or log or something, they probably are going to stick in them. If you are practicing, go ahead and take 3 patterns that you have, pull the hooks off, the split rings off, and cast them. Because if you get bit, you got bit, you got rewarded for doing the right thing. But then you can throw that spin bait anywhere. You can put it anywhere then. And by putting it anywhere, I mean you can actually throw that thing into the trees and find out the fish aren't eating it in the trees, but they're eating it as soon as it gets outside the tree. Now, come tournament time or come your weekend where you're going to spend a lot of time spy baiting, you can now parallel those tree lines and catch those fish, realizing that you didn't have to go in the trees to go get them. They actually would come out and get the bait. So you can make some ahas, some quick ahas doing that. Another thing I think too is I had a elite pro that told me, hey man, I know this technique works. I know it does. And actually he was a guide on Guntersville and he said, I know it works, but I can't get bit. I said, well, why don't you go out and chase schooling fish with it? Because I know that's such an easy thing to do, right? We're kind of driving along. We know this end of the lake, usually those fish will blow up on the point if we fish the lake long enough. So we'll just hover over there and wait till that happens, or when the birds start working that bank or whatever, and then race over there and just throw the dang thing and start fishing around those schooling fish. You get bit and you kind of get an idea. I will say this, don't take that home and make that your spy baiting session, because you still have quite a bit to get through, but at least you can get an idea what they feel like when the rod loads up. Sometimes I'm reeling along and a fish will hit the lure and I can feel the lure coming to me, but I can feel this like popping and shaking at the other end of the line, and it's popping and shaking. And what's happening during that time frame is that bass has eaten the lure, continued moving my direction, realized he didn't like the lure. He's opened up his mouth and he starts doing this, and the lure's doing this inside his mouth, and he's trying to get rid of it. And I can actually feel that on the end of my line when he's trying to shake and get rid of it. And I can tell, and all of a sudden it frees up again, and I'm reeling along and it's smooth and reeling. The other thing, once you get in tune with the lures, you'll start to feel the wobble in the lure. That tiny little lure, you'll start to actually feel the wobble. You can see it in your line and in your rod. When you first start though, most guys don't feel that. But and usually it comes after spending some time. Pretty soon you're so in tune with it, you can see that little wobble take place. So those are just kind of like little keys that that just kind of help get you confirmed on that thing. And again, try not to think of it as I got to be getting confidences. Think about it as I've got to execute A to get B to get C. And let's just take I'm going to use a dumb example, but let's just say we're talking about a hump. Just a regular hump. And that hump is about the size of a truck, okay? And it's in 20 foot of water. The top of the hump sits in 20 foot of water. When you come up to that hump, most of the time, our human behavior, unfortunately, is to just throw our drop shot on top of the hump and let it be. Or to take our crankbait and kind of throw it up there around the hump and grind down. I'm not saying that's everybody's way of doing it. And then some guy probably is going to hit me up later and go, that's not how I do it. But what I'm getting at is we tend to kind of just fish at the target. And I always say, my tip to you is to fish the back 40, I call it. Basically throw 40 feet beyond your target if you can. So here's that hump. Throw 40 feet past that hump. couple things happen. It gives you plenty of time, maybe not you, but me, it gives me plenty of time to make the lure get into position, not be curling its hair, brushing its teeth. Everything starts to go into position while that lure is coming in. And once that lure is acting just the way that I want it to, I have now plenty of time for it to sneak into the area that I want it to. So that extra 40 feet past your target, for example, it doesn't have to be that exactly, but I'm exaggerating that to share the importance. That 40 feet gives the line its direction. It gives the lure its direction, running straight and true. It gives you time with the reel to get the rod ready, to get your position ready. It gets everything in sequence. And then when it hits the hump, it's already moving naturally, not adjusting. When you cast on top of the hump, you're adjusting. So all these other things are happening. I'm going to click the reel over. I'm going to tighten my line up. And so my spin bait goes like this, and then it goes this way, and then, oh, now it's starting to come straight again. So it starts acting a fool because it never had time to set up. So you help yourself by doing. The other thing is, we know this, we've been fishing long enough. When you cast to the end of your line, you've hit the end of your line. It ain't going any further. What it will do is it'll shorten your distance for you because it'll start to pendulum if you keep it on tight line. So if you throw on top of the hump, it's likely that you could tighten your line up and miss the hump. And if I take this area, this sometimes is like 20 feet that we miss the target from casting on top of the hump, depending on where on top of the hump you cast. But just casting at the top of the hump, clicking my reel over, now my line's tight and the bait's coming back at me like a jig would, anything else would. So, you know, when you throw a jig a lot of times, or you've seen guys, they skip a jig underneath the tree. The jig's made it underneath the tree. It waves, hello, I'm here. It's in underneath the tree. But if I tighten click over my reel handle, guess what the jig does? It starts to swim out underneath the tree really quickly. So I skip the jig underneath the tree, it's skipping, and as it's skipping, I'm starting to pull line out so that it continues its trajectory, and then it has no tension. There's no tension, so it's not going to swing. There's no tension, so it just falls straight down. So I get it closer to the target. So in spy baiting, you want to do something similar. You want the lure to go past its target and come through to get it closest to its target, versus casting on top of the hump and having it pendulum away from its target. So that's a big thing that guys do. Now I can condense that and say, you go to tree stumps, you can do the same thing. Cast beyond the tree stump. I have a buddy who works in fishing, and he's pretty high up on a media side of a company, and him and one of his pros went back, and they went into some backwater in the south, and they started fishing spy baiting. But usually what they do is they go back in these tree stumps and they start to throw a spinnerbait, banging spinnerbaits or crankbaits off these tree stumps that are just submerged underneath the surface. And they started throwing a spin bait back there, and they caught more fish than they knew what to do with. One, fish probably never seen minnows free like that before. So you know, acting a fool. So those fish were probably going to do payback. But the point is that they figured out how to spy bait along the trees. I actually sometimes take the spin bait when I'm just bored or blowing off steam or de-stressing or decompressing, and I'll go out to a river here that we have brown trout in, and I'll throw the spin bait in the river and throw it right up against the tree, the lay down, and I'll run it there and I'll stop it and let it just hover in the current, and a big brown will come up and eat it. And some of the fly anglers get mad at me because, you know, they're going after those little 6-inch fish, you know, trying to present a fly, and they see this 4-pound brown come out of the water.
Which you've been doing a lot of that brown trout fishing, right?
Yeah, well, I started looking. I was reading data. You know, I keep data sheets. I just keep data on what I'm doing, and so I was looking one year. I go, man, I've caught a lot of walleye, and then I looked down. The second number of a number of fish that I caught was brown trout or trout in general, and then the third number was crappie. I caught a lot of crappie offshore. And I was like, God, you know, and so I decided I was going to go stick my nose in that. I'm not a trout angler. I'm not a crappie angler. You probably don't want me crappie fishing with you because I'll mess you up. But I do go to bed thinking about bass. I dream about bass. I wake up in the morning thinking about bass. I kiss my wife and then think about bass. So I'm 100%
Amen.
a bass guy. But with that, I thought there's some really good data here that's showing how effective this lure is on this species of fish. So I started exploring more and more with it. And I'll give you an example. I had a section of river that I knew for years. I go in there with a Japanese jerkbait. I have a bunch of little Japanese jerkbaits that I love to throw just for entertainment. And I go in there and every once in a while I'll catch a brown, like 1 to 3 brown in that section of river, every 1 or 2 efforts or sessions. I went in there with the spin bait. This was low water, when the river settles down. I went in there with the spin bait, and my ratio like jumped dramatically. I mean, like jumped. So if I was catching 1 brown, I was catching 15 to 20 browns spybaiting. 1 brown with a jerkbait, 15 to 20 browns spybaiting. It was so dramatic. I have a nephew that lives in Southern California that was like, Uncle David, is this really true? And he's kind of a trout guy. And I said, I'm not lying to you, but so he drove up or flew up. I don't know how he got here. He shows up at my doorstep. Well, I want to go spybaiting with you. So we went out, and it wasn't even ideal conditions. And we went out and slayed like, I don't know, 30, 35 browns, that day. And he got it. Yeah. Now, again, things probably were ideal. Conditions were set ideal. But what I'm getting at is the lure itself. I wish it was the angler, but the lure itself really applied to those fish if you fished it the correct way. It just really made sense. Those fish, I got to see some amazing stuff. One night I was fishing and I made adaptations because of spy baiting. We know this, right? You fish the mid column and then you fish below. Okay. And I'm going to talk about that. But anyways, I was fishing the bait and I come through a depression in the river, like a little eddy, and I'm coming through and here comes this 4 or 5 pound brown. I can watch him. And he must have come from 40 feet away, but he shows up behind the lure and I'm reeling the lure and I don't change anything. And the lure is coming straight at me. He came up, eats the whole lure in his mouth. And then before I finished the crank, the full 360 degrees, he let the lure go and swam off right in front of me, nose to nose. So that told me, and what was happening was my spin bait was, how can I say this? So we're going this way. My spin bait was traveling this way and the fish was traveling this way. So when the fish ate and he didn't like it anymore, he let it go, it released. So I changed my approach, just like we would in spy baiting. Instead of fishing the upper column, I decided to fish the lower column. And I started to trace the bottom contour, which made the fish turn this way when he ate the bait. And I caught that fish the second time. And then I caught another one the same way again. And it was kind of one of those confirming moments. But I would have not known that if I hadn't had the discipline and the execution from the very beginning of spy baiting. I wouldn't have not known how to necessarily solve that. And I had like 6 browns do it to me in 3 days, where they came up and ate the bait and spit it out. Now, I don't know if they got my house number or what, but they sure were making fun of me during that session. So so I had to get a little bit wise, but again, the change for me was really micro, and it would be for you guys too. But it was micro because the only change I needed to really make was bring it deeper. It's going to change the angle of the fish. Just bring it deeper. Just let it trace along the bottom. They have to come in at a different angle to eat it, and we caught those fish, and some of them were really big. But a great deal. But what I'm getting at is in presenting that lure. Remember we talked about that hump. 20 foot. I call it split the difference. And I tell pros this all the time. These are the elite tour guys, the elite series guys, the FLW tour guys. I say, if you don't have a lot of time fishing, then when you get to your hump or you get to your place where you think the spybait fish would be going, or you think there are big fish that haven't committed to something, then make your cast over the hump. And let's say it's in 20 feet. Well, fish that lure in 10 to 13 feet, right over the hump, about midsection. That will get the fish that are kind of looking up, wanting to eat. That will get them to go. If that doesn't work, your next cast, put the lure on the bottom. Now, not directly on the bottom making contact, but, several inches or a foot. on the bottom. If you make those 2 casts on a place where you think there are definitely big fish, you're going to be in a better position just on 2 casts. Now, I may fish several casts to that spot, but I'm talking about pros that are really trying to make the adjustments on the fly, and they don't have time yet to sit down and spy bait for 3 days in a row. I took a guy that was from South Africa. He flew in to fish with me, and I said, hey, we're going to spy bait, and he had a couple little lures he wanted to throw. And so I said, I'm going to spy bait the whole day. I don't want you spy baiting. I just want you watching me. And I said, day 2, I'm going to give you the rod. You're going to spy bait all day, and I'm just going to throw jigs or whatever and watch you. But the whole idea is what I wanted him to see was the transformation that would take place. So the whole day he got to watch me, and he caught a couple fish off the jig. Look, I caught a couple fish off the jig. It was really a spy bait weekend, by the way, meaning the season, everything just dialed in. The bait was moving, and just a lot of stuff that was ready to fish, suspended fish. But he got to watch me catch 40 fish spy baiting. That was it. He was convinced, but that's not enough. He's got to now do it himself. So then I handed him the rod, and the poor guy, I didn't let him put the rod down. He had to have that dang rod, that ugly rod, for the whole day. That, and if you're not used to that, it can wear on you for sure. But those are some real good ways to get immersed in it, and without a lot of huge risk. I'll say this too. Again, we talk about those hooks. If you take those hooks off, you can kind of fish the rougher topography or the cover laden areas that you're afraid to lose. But another way you can, if you're fishing a bunch of rock, for example, and Ben, you probably get this quite a bit, where you're fishing bottom or shallow, where you got all this sharp chunk rock that's not too far away. You can fish that stuff spy baiting. You can almost bump the cover with that stuff. And all you need to do is drag that lure through the water column. Look and see which hook point sits in the keel position of that lure. So that one hook point. And then all you want to do with that hook point is you want to bend it back towards the shank. And what ends up happening is you create a bumper. And that bumper now can hit the rock. Now, that helps you climb over the rock when you're getting down there, instead of incidentally catching it, catching the rock as you're strolling through. It'll bump the rock, because that's the very first point of contact with the lure. Rarely is it the nose of the bait, because guess what? The nose is actually sitting at, the angle of attack is actually upward. So the nose usually doesn't snag onto things, but coming up over that piece of cover, that hook can catch it. So that's a way, just bending that hook point back towards the shank when you know you're going to be battling rock the whole time. That's, in shallow water, or like a rock flat or whatnot. And the other thing is when you do snag the lure, a lot of us think bite, set hook right away, right? You don't have to do that. You can, if you're in those kind of areas, traversing those type of areas, you can just reel along, and if your lure stops, you stop. I guarantee you, if it's a fish, it'll start moving again. So if it doesn't move, you can then go over there and and shake your rod tip and get your lure back. So that's another way. And I know that's ridiculously common sense stuff, but it is another way to get back a $14 lure, which I don't like losing them.
That's amazing.
So I have a question, David. Yes. Something I've seen coming out of Japan is, you just mentioned bending those treble hooks down creates a bumper. I'm seeing a lot of these 2 hook, I guess you would call them. It's not a treble hook at that point, because it's not 3 points. It's just two points. And I've thought about running those on spy baits and some of my other hard baits, just experimenting.
Yeah.
What is that kind of the purpose of those hooks, is to kind of have that same effect, or am I missing the point of what that hook is?
I think those hooks have pertinence depending on the body shape of that lure that they're on. I think you got to pay real close attention to that. Because I mean, I've done this years ago, but those hooks sit and they have a natural cradle that's in between the 2 hook points and the bends. Mm-hmm. And remember, we're talking about a moving bait. So with the moving bait, we're going to do what? Those hooks are actually going to rise as force of water gets against them. They're going to start to rise. And as they rise, they're going to come up against the belly of the bait. And so if they're V pattern, the body is going to probably sit somewhere in the middle of those hooks. What I'm getting at is those hooks will almost kind of hide among the profile. it's possible. I don't know. I'm not saying it will happen for sure, but just knowing that hook form, that may be one thing that happens to the first hook. It may actually go up and cradle the belly of the lure instead of having a treble hook, available. Yeah, I don't know if I can show you that, but having a treble hook available. So that would be one thing. But I like your idea. The brilliant thing about it is I don't have all the answers, and you may find something. I think those double hooks at the back of the lure may be pertinent as well. But I haven't done a lot with that. I haven't studied that a lot at all. I've studied it a little bit, but I think it's a great place to explore. But those would be the kind of red flags I would probably have with that particular configuration. But yeah, I think it's good.
Yeah, because the reason I was wanting to experiment with it, Tennessee River, we have a lot of tributaries, right? We've got a lot of really shallow water smallmouth fishing that, it's river floats, it's kayak fishing, it's jet boat fishing. I mean, it's stuff where you can't get your traditional bass boats, glass boats, stuff like that. And these fish feed on these little snell darters. And these snell darters are, it's tiny little bait. And, they're very prevalent here in East Tennessee and Tennessee River system. And I was always afraid, like you say, to throw a $14 spybait out there in river current. But knowing and hearing you talk about fishing for those brown trout, we had several conversations about this, off this podcast, just on phone calls and stuff. It started kicking that idea in my brain. I can mimic these snell darters with this spybait, and I can show these fish something that I know will absolutely get bit because I'm dealing with a really finicky smallmouth that can see you from a long way off. Yeah. And so that's why I was kind of thinking those treble hooks that don't have that point, something I can put that spybait in an area and get it out without having to really worry about it. Yeah. And so, I think it's going to be interesting. It's definitely something I'm going to experiment with just to see. And just to see what would happen. I mean, because I really do believe that that's that's going to be a bait that I can get a lot of big bites on.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and I always tell guys, I encourage you to experiment because, like I said, I don't have all the answers. I've been around for a long time. I think my wife has said too long, but I have been around for a long time, so I think things come and go. But I think just look at the possibilities. It may not be the two hook configuration, but maybe when you do start experimenting with that, another idea pops into your head about that. Or maybe you temper the hooks with heat and then you start to widen them so they have a wider flare. Or maybe you look at that and say two hook design, like David said, it cradles the belly of the hook lure, so it's not really allowing the fish to get hooked. The 2 points are hooked along the side of the lure. Does that make sense? That two hook configuration goes right up against the sides of the hook. So you may change that, or maybe you pinch it, or maybe you reverse it. So, or maybe you use a single hook. Now, I use single hooks sometimes when I'm fishing in really, really ugly stuff. And again, Gunnersville keeps coming up tonight. I do not know why, but because I haven't been to it for a long time. But here's a great example. I'm in Gunnersville and I'm fishing, and I can see these fish moving, this bait moving in the grass, and every once in a while a bigger fish is on them, and I'm like, it's almost like they're not following. It's almost like the bait's coming into an area and it triggers a big fish, and then the bait leaves, and then another one. It wasn't even like they were pressing it. The little fish were pressing the bait, moving it, but I didn't see any big fish with it, and it was pretty clear. I see this guy yell at me, "Rah, rah, rah." And I promise you, I know very few people fishing. So I waved back, and I thought, well, maybe it's boat trouble. He kind of looks like he's waved me over, and I just waved back. You okay? And pretty soon he gets on his trolling motor and he comes on over and he starts talking to me. He's like, "Man, you're that Spybait guy. I know. I saw you. You're that Spybait guy." And I thought, "Oh no." He's gonna say something, and so I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to deal with me in that respect. How can I help you? And he says, "No." He goes, "Man, I'm catching the snot out of these fish." You know what he was doing, which is a brilliant idea. He took 20-pound monofilament, tied it on the spin bait, and strolled it across those grass tops in Alabama. Now, and that's what I'm saying. It gives credence to the guys that just they take the technique and they learn. Now he still goes and does the other stuff, but now he's figured out, I can go up shallow and fish those fish. And he started, you know, hey, don't you tell anybody about this. I'm doing this. So I kept it quiet for several years. But yeah, I mean, what a great adaptation. You know, what a smart guy. I mean, great adaptation.
That's so cool.
Yeah,
I think like hearing all of these different ways guys are learning how to adapt it to the way that they're fishing is pretty unique too.
Yeah. You know, guys I had one guy tell me, man, I rip it off the bottom, I catch them. Well, I did that in R&D phases. I ripped it off the bottom. I did things to try to enact, because I had plenty of video of fish changing their moods. And again, my focal point was targeting neutral mode fish. I don't know if you've ever watched them in any expanded time, but you know, they could be like smallmouth that are sitting at a bridge piling, and you roll a spinnerbait by, they don't even look at the spinner. They keep their head straight, and they're still in the current, and you're rolling a spinnerbait by, they're not even looking at it. Those fish were the fish that we were really, really trying to target, because those fish are telling that they're cautious. Their window's very, very tight. They're very cautious, but still they want to eat. It's not that they don't want to eat. It's just when and how you can trigger them. And you know, the old, I talk about the old cat. You have an old cat or an old dog in your house, and you take a string and a ball and you drag it by their nose, and the old cat looks at you like, that's great, idiot. You know, and you're kind of like, well, get the ball. You drag it by their nose again, and they don't go and get it. But there's some things that have happened behaviorally that actually tell you that animal's a predator. What you may not, the old cat may not lift its paw and grab the ball, but if you watch his eyes instantly locked on that bait, or instantly locked on the ball. And so now you graduate it to, maybe you stop the ball and start to twitch it a little bit in front of him, and now his ears perk up. So now you got the eyes and the ears. And maybe his nose is flashing, it's scenting, and it's flashing as he's trying to pick up the visual cues of this animal, or this inanimate object that you're now making an animal. And then pretty soon he lays his paw on it and goes, here, now are you satisfied? I caught the bad guy. And you get happy and you go home and go with your day. But the point is that he was in kind of this detuned mode. He wasn't going to really go and chase things down. He knows the stimulus that's out and above him, and what you did is you actually kind of tricked that stimulus again and reenacted it. And that's what, I mean, it's kind of hard to explain, but that's really what we were shooting for in spybaiting, was to try to do that with fish. And the outcome is the active fish, they'll go all across the football field to go get that that ball. The active fish will chase that thing down, right? But the inactive fish are eating it. And that was really the goal. So that it helps get to kind of a double whammy. I mean, you got not only catch the active fish. Now, when you fish a jerkbait, the active fish come and get the jerkbait, right? But have you ever fished a jerkbait and watched the active fish not eat the jerkbait? You're like, what the heck? I'm doing everything. Look, check this out. This is a double step, you know, and you start twitching the bait, making it do all sorts of things and wink at them, and they just keep going. I've seen big smallmouth pass up a jerkbait before. So the idea was, how can you get those type of fish that are a little bit more cautious and more neutral to be in play, to get there.
And it does show the just power of a spybait. And that's what I tell everybody about it is the ultimate tool for taking a predator that is the ultimate creature in its environment, apex of everything in its environment. You know, you take a bass, you know, and obviously muskies are bigger and badder, but you really look at a bass, it is the ultimate predator in its environment. I mean, it's the great white of the lake. It can kill in anything it wants to. And I truly do believe that, like you said, when those fish are exposed to stimulus, whether it be good or bad, their entire life, they're so in tune to that, even though they are, you know, their brain's no bigger than the size of your thumb, they have to be completely in tune and be the ultimate predator in their environment, because that's the way they get big.
Yeah, you know, there's studies out there. I haven't chased those down for a while, but, you know, a rattle trap is one of those baits that has been tested multiple times on bass and bass behavior. And, you know, the loud banging of the rattles, the intense vibration, it works. And then all of a sudden, as soon as those fish start to get used to it, they drop off and they don't eat it anymore. I mean, they just absolutely stop. Have you noticed that?
Absolutely.
So lipless bait fishing is a very interesting science project for me. But that is what you're talking about, is the behavior of those fish basically say enough's enough. I'm overloaded or overwhelmed, or I'm now cautious, and they pull back in neutral. Another example of neutral behavior is when bass are following minnows. If bass come up, like especially the juveniles, they come up and they get into a minnow school right away. The young bucks have kind of come over there and, oh, we got bait, and you'll watch the bait start to do this. They'll just kind of start to quicken and start to move. And the bass that stays with that minnow school a good 60 yards or so, all of a sudden you'll watch the minnows stop and start just swimming normally again. And it's almost like they got used to, now the bass is right there, nothing's changed. The distance, the proximity is still the same, but he just swims along with them, and they lose their sensitivity, and they start to go back to this real normal precedent. And those fish, those bass, I think, learn real quickly how to eat. Mm-hmm. So, but that's an example how the minnows actually get back into a neutral mode position as well.
So, talking about lipless fishing all year, kind of brings up like the Apex, right? So the Apex tune lipless crankbait, because this is the G-Fix, which is just ridiculously loud and really heavy. And for me, it's like a phenomenal bait when I want to fish it along the bottom, or I want to fish very precise areas and I want to make a long cast and have it like fall straight. Yeah, the G-Fix is the deal. But I've yet to like go out and find success with this. I've not thrown it much, to be honest with you, but it's a totally different bait. It doesn't fish like you would typically expect a lot of rattling lipless baits to fish. And so,
so that the Apex tune is, some people would have called it a huge risk to bring to the industry, maybe. But what I can tell you is it takes you away from traditional lipless fishing and extends your lipless game. It basically can help your lipless game from pre-spawn all the way into the year. Now, as you get into, it just kind of depends on the bodies of water and stuff. But you know, a traditional lipless has a rattle. It's pretty boisterous. It's pretty loud. And early in the year, your fish are really succumb to that. They're very, very much. It doesn't even matter if it's dirty water or clear water. They'll eat it early in the year. And then all of a sudden, you'll start to see about that spawn time, it just starts to drop off. Well, in my research, I was watching behaviorally. I would watch the behavioral constructs of the fish. And the rattling baits that were really boisterous had become accustomed to so much earlier in the year that they would follow the bait to a certain point and then they would drop off. And at that point, I was kind of making markers or notations, and then I would change the bait a little bit. And I was making the bait maybe have a softer swim action, making the bait maybe be a little bit quieter. And I kept changing these baits, and from vibration, percussion to sound. And at the end of my trials, I was having the same exact fish. This is a test control, meaning I'm using the same populace of fish. And there's still variables, like Tuesday they're hungry, Wednesday they're not. That's a variable. But what ended up happening is some of those fish would follow the bait, committing to it, but following it. But at the same time, there was still too much stimulus, and they would punch the bait behind the gill. If I can say that, and gill plate, and they would punch the bait, and they'd back off, and they'd watch the bait, and then pretty soon they'd get disinterested and move away. And I went from that transition to eventually making those fish commit. So out of that experience and that research, I kind of came up with Aaron Martins on this Apex tune, and it's going that direction, basically allowing you to fish behind people that are using a very loud, boisterous rattle trap, and that have already pulled fish off the cover, and now they're catching those fish on that bank. You can go behind those folks now and catch those fish that they're not catching. It's percussion is my focal point. The frequency or the acoustics to the bait are much softer, much more dense, much more lower frequency too. So it was moving that direction in order for you to not only catch them in the springtime, but to start to catch them at post-spawn when the water starts to warm up. And at post-spawn, remember, a lot of lakes start to filter, so they start to get clearer. So now you get into the clear water situations. Because every once in a while, I could catch fish in the summertime off a lipless bait in the early morning on schooling fish. The fish would be just going at it, and I would only get like 2 when I would do it. I'd throw the lipless out there, and I'd burn it as fast as I could, and boom, I'd get a fish. But after doing it 3 or 4 times, the fish were like, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm tuned into that." So I knew that the application for a lipless bait, and if you think about the profile of the lipless, it's so natural. It's a very natural profile. So what my hypothesis was, I want to make a lipless bait last longer through the year. So that was kind of the focal point. And I think when you've probably thrown it now, you can feel the vibration is much different. It's such a teeny, as far as profile, such a teeny thin bait. You can be shockingly surprised how much vibration, how much banging inside happens to make that bait work. And yet, it doesn't have the sound chambers.
Yeah, so I find it really interesting. And I was lucky where I was fishing this big Apex 100. Mm-hmm. And I know when this came out, like, I had messaged you extensively and was like, okay, what makes this effective and what makes it work? And one of the things that you had talked about was not necessarily the horizontal or the vertical fall of it, but how it almost glides. And you can see that translate into this bait too. I'm trying to grab myself a lipless, a red eye, to show the difference in profile. Okay, so this is your red eye shad, and this is the Apex. Just noticeably thinner and noticeably, not necessarily like overall length, but noticeably thinner. And this has such a more natural sort of rocking side to side and more of a horizontal fall as opposed to something just falling like a rock straight down.
Yeah. Yeah, and that the Vibration 68 G Fix was made to kind of use with your demolition team. You go throw it against the bank there, and it falls right where it entered, and it falls to the bottom. And from there, you start your tracing, and it covers that water. It was really meant to be dirty, nasty, in 30-mile-an-hour winds, and you could still fish the bait. The Apex tune is kind of like this hyper finesse side of it, but sheds water differently, and actually is its obstruction or obstacle resistance is much higher, so you can get over cover with it a lot better. But you can slow it down and still have this vibration. And again, it doesn't have rattles in it because we were moving that direction. But the vibration is really the key per the profile, and there's nothing on the market like it. Because there's nothing on the market like it that can shed water the way that particular lure can. So it's kind of on its own. And I'm really excited about seeing guys study this concept. Again, it's a concept that's kind of out there a little ways. It's asking people to kind of take more of a risk. Really, you can start throwing lipless baits, later in the year. Well, when you get a lot of wind on a bank, what do some guys do? They pick up a white spinnerbait. They go throw that spinnerbait, right? The wind's on the bank now. So yeah. It may kind of lend itself to that kind of application as well. Here's something that's alarming about that bait. The one that you're holding up, I think, was one of the prototypes that I had. And I was fishing early year on the Columbia River. I fished with 3 different guys. All 3 guys were able to select their own lipless crankbait. We fished familiar topography, meaning, yeah, you use this color crankbait when you fish this. It was kind of common sense. And those guys went out and they fished, and we fished for 12 hours. And I threw that Apex tune, and they threw the other bait. Well, I caught more fish and bigger fish. And then I switched with them, and they caught more fish and bigger fish. Confirming. Now, here's the thing. The water visibility was only 15 to 18 inches. Okay. That was the water visibility. So there wasn't real clear. Now, that's not bad for in the South. I mean, that's stained maybe. But in the Pacific Northwest, we usually can see down way deeper, right? So it was pretty dirty for that setting. That's one thing. The other thing is it didn't have any rattles. That's the other thing. The other thing is, because of that visibility, the whole bait disappeared well before the 15 inches, because it's a very translucent bait. You saw it. It's super translucent. So it actually disappeared in the suspended sediment much earlier than the other bait. So what I'm saying is, it was like working a clear bait, and that prototype actually had all the paint knocked off it anyways. But I wasn't there to do patterns and color patterns. What I was really there to do is see whether or not the percussion could trigger the fish. Well, I caught 26 pounds one day of smallmouth. That you would think that would be the confirming moment, but what it was is it got me excited to continue trying. So another guy, bring another guy in the boat, and the same thing. He figures it out real quickly. Give me that thing. Let me. And he starts trying. Yeah, I think you got something here. And then the third guy. Well, when you talk 36 hours of lipless crankbait fishing, and then 3 different types of lipless crankbaits being presented against the prototype, and then the prototype switching position twice in the boat. You have it, I have it, we switch, and then a little bit later, we switch again. That's a lot of data. It's not super scientific, but it starts to say there is something here to the vibration of this lure and to the output, what it's emitting and what it's giving off. So that's what we went with.
I can't wait to get my hands on that bait and throw it on Chickamauga, where, you know, you look at Chickamauga, it is like lipless central, right? Everybody has a lipless bait. Everybody throws a lipless bait. It is such a staple on that lake that I truly believe the fish at a certain point just do get tired of messing with it, you know, because I mean, these places, you know, there's big, you know, public holes that hold hundreds, if not thousands of fish at a time. You know, it's lake saturated with bass, but they will just shut down. They'll just be done. And, you know, and I've got buddies who are, you know, doing all kinds of experimental weird fishing where they're throwing, you know, micro drop shots. They're throwing, you know, all kinds of crazy stuff. But I would love to be able to have a lipless to just go in there and be like, okay, I'm going to throw this lipless that is completely different. It's going to, you know, completely counter, you know, what you're throwing and be able to pick up those fish. I think it's fascinating. You guys definitely hit a. I love niche baits. I love finding a niche. I love niche baits, and that is a very niche bait that I think is going to be epic. Not only pre-spawn, but like you said, spawn, post-spawn as well.
Yeah.
Well, so you look at Duo, and this is something that I don't know if it was Alex that I had this conversation with or someone, but like Duo is very good at coming out with baits that are different, almost to the point where you have to think about the bait and the way that you're fishing it differently than you would a traditional bait. But then you also have the same line of a similar line of baits where you can just go and have a lipless or just have a square bow, which you guys are coming out with, or just have a deep diver. So I think it's really interesting, and I think spy baiting was sort of the introduction of that, and like that's why people almost overcomplicate spy baiting as opposed to like a Senko, which realistically is not that much less difficult than a spy bait. You know what I'm saying?
I had Senkos sit in my boat for like 60 days before I used them because I thought they looked like the most truth thing. And boy, was I wrong. But yeah, you know, I think when I was asked to join Duo, one of my goals, really was kind of heartfelt goal, was I really want to give back to the anglers. There's so many guys out here for whatever be the reason. But I really want us to focus in on giving back to the angler. Yes, we have a lure, and yes, it is expensive. So we can't dodge that. And yes, the company has to make money and all that other stuff. But really, can I help them have tools that they can go away with a pleasurable affect and actually feel good about what's going on? You know, and it was pretty, you know, my request was that our R&D department, you know, really have the ability to expand and to really critical think and to analyze, and we've really moved that way. So I've been honored to be a part of it. That was really one of my requests, because I know that I've been around a while now to know that a lot of folks will go right over to the CAD machine, spit out a shape, and make 65,000 of them, or go call some other manufacturer to make something similar and make them. And there's really no thought that's gone into them. And listen, you can honestly, you can catch bass with a shoestring and a hook and a Texas rig weight. You can. It happens. I proved it to a guy one time. I took shoestring, cut it, put a tiny little bullet weight on it, rigged it like a Texas rig worm, and I took a black marker and I put lines in it, and I went out. And as easy and ridiculous as that sounds, you know, some of our industry goes that way. And so I wanted us to depart, make sure that we weren't going that way, that we were really considering our consumer group in a respectful fashion. Doesn't mean that we make everything right all the time. It doesn't mean that we've got it all knocked down. But yeah, I spend a lot of time contemplating actions and fish behavior and that kind of stuff in hopes of we don't have to hit the mark every single time. But if we make a jerkbait, I really want our jerkbait to service the angler. Really, the guy can walk away with the idea that I throw this jerkbait and I really like it. And that helps him think about the other baits that we provide online for him to continue his passion or his dream. I have a lot of pros that I don't sponsor, that I'm really honored that they use our baits. I'm really honored about that, because they can go obviously anywhere, and obviously they have other commitments, and sometimes they find several baits within our lineup that really help. And it's not just, oh, well, it's a new bait, the fish haven't seen it. You know, that's sure, that's a consideration too. But some of these guys have taken our lures and really made them tools for themselves. And so that's really the piece that I think that I have, at least from a professional aspect. I know the company's got to make money. I get it. But I think it's really cool when somebody walks away saying, I've got the right tools, and this company helped me do that. I think it's cool. I get a lot of backdoor messages, and it's just awesome. These guys are like, dude, I'm telling you what, this is something else. And I get to see that, and I think that's the greatest reward for me. Sure.
It's awesome, dude. I love to hear you say that, because I'll never forget my first experience with a Duo Realis bait was a jerkbait. It was the jerkbait you guys made. And I had a buddy that owned a small tackle shop, and I think he actually imported them. I don't think that they'd come to America yet. And he handed me a couple. He said, here, dude, these took forever to get here, but I've heard they're the deal. Try them out. And I go out and, catch 22 pounds of smallmouth, and totally blew my mind, and so this jerkbait was like, dude, we freaking treated them like they were diamonds, I mean, like we were going swimming for them in 40-degree water if we had to get them back. And then the G87, I've heard the G87 was coming out again, same kind of deal. My buddy's trying to import them. I get them all Japanese packaging. There's no English on them whatsoever. Go out there, first time throwing it, you whiz it out there, and I'm cranking this thing. And, people that watch my channel, Ben knows this. I am a cranker. I mean, I crank all year long. It's something I love to do. First 4 reel handle turns of that bait, I was like, this is something different. This is something that like nobody else is doing this right now. And ended up again catching, 20 pounds of fish, set on one hole, went behind guys, caught fish. And like, it was something that at that moment I thought, this company, I got to find out who's in charge over here. I got to find out who's representing these people and shake their hand. And the first time I got to meet you at ICAST, me and Ben both, it was an awesome experience, because I thought, I finally get to talk to the guy that is that is put in the work, put in the time, that is designing tools to catch fish. And that's what I always love to tell people is a bait is a bait. A bait is a bait is a bait. I don't care what it is. I mean, everybody's got a creature bait. Everybody's got a lipless. Everybody's got a jerk bait. Yeah. But when a company can design a tool to make me a better angler, to make me realize that, I have a tool that is for a specific job, because my dad has always told me this, and forever I can always remember him saying this, is that every job has a tool, and there's a right tool for every job. Mm-hmm. And fishing is no different. if it's a specific lipless, if it's a specific jerkbait, if it's whatever it is. And that's what you guys are designing. And that's why, you know, even though I don't formally represent Duo Realis, every person that I talk to that wants to know, you know, hey man, who's making the apex of baits? What is the, you know, who's making tools? I'm like, it's Duo Realis, because I've just had the life experience. I've had fishing experience. It's beautiful products, awesome people putting in time and work to make awesome products.
Well, I thank you for that. It really is. It's my goal to see guys be happy with something that they've chased all their life, and we forget about this. I don't even know how I even got into bass fishing. You know, I mean I do, but I mean it really wasn't on. It wasn't my marker. There was no way as a child what I was doing or where I was that said anything that I would be way over here. I could tell you all you wanted to know about concrete. I could tell you everything you wanted to know about the street, the concrete. But to be mesmerized by fish, how that happened, I don't even know. I remember I was sitting with a family. They took me, quote unquote, camping, and I was sitting there, and I think I was probably too ornery to invite over to the campfire. So they put me on a bucket over in the darkness with a fishing rod and said, "You sit here," and lo and behold, the rod lit up and started vibrating. Well, I didn't even know what it was. I thought it was possessed, and I was screaming. Now, mind you, I'd never even been near water. I didn't even know what water looked like outside of it coming out of a sink. And so, you know, I just thought that the monster was coming out of the lake to eat me or something. So I'm screaming, running up the bank, hanging onto the rod. I forgot to let that go. And I dragged this poor little bluegill out of, 30 feet out of the water. And they come over and they say, "Holy smokes, he caught one." And they unhooked it, put water in the bucket, put the fish in the bucket, and gave me a flashlight. And I sat there until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning staring at that fish swimming in circles and was just done. I was hooked from that day on. And
amazing.
Yeah. So, it just intrigued me. It's an interesting creature. We have a great sport. And that's why I really want to be good to it, because it's brought a lot of people. I always say it's some of the best medicine you can have is to go fishing, right? And it also crosses all sorts of lines, social economic lines, racial lines, religious lines, whatever you want to call it, for whatever be your interest. It crosses all these things, and people have one thing in common, and that's to enjoy this pleasure. So I have a tremendous respect for it, and I wanted that to continue. Not that Duo wouldn't, but it was really one of my things that I was very adamant about, was that we provide the best service that we can, even though we're a JDM company. And a lot of JDM companies don't work that way. They're like, "Hey, you're interested in our great product? Good, bye." And that's it, And so you dump your money down, they hand you the product, they shake hands, they say that was a nice, Benjamin, nice guy, goodbye, and you're done with the deal. And I really wanted it to be more. I want it to be kind of, I don't want to call it a movement. That's not the word, but I really did want it to be a passionate and fun experience to be with Duo. And so I've said that as long as I'm here, I'm going to try to do that in every way possible for people. I've seen guys that, that have all the money in the world, and you get them in the boat, and you teach them something small, and it goes a long ways with them to the the guy that can barely make his rent payment, and he loves fishing, and fishing is his solace. And so each one of those guys are very, very important to me, for sure.
That's
amazing. Amazing.
So I have one more question, and then we'll probably hop off here. But what is your new passion child? So you had the Apex Vibe, you had a lipless, you brought the Spybait to life. You're obviously going to keep refining those. Is there another passion? You did the Roman made stuff. What is the next kind of thought process?
Gosh, I don't know, man. I've done, I've just done a lot of things. One time I was with Lucky Craft back in the early years. I'm going to say late 90s or mid 90s. Then I was with Jackal in the early 2000s, and then
I want to talk about Jackal. Just sorry, 1 second.
Yeah.
My buddy, I'd never seen the Jackal re-range in person, and our buddy came out and fished with us. the weight transfer in that thing, every cast, no joke.
Break it off.
Yeah, every cast.
You broke it?
No.
So when he would cast it in the big Jackal rearrange, he'd sling the piss out of that thing, and every time me and Ben would both look back because we'd think he had snapped his line because that weight transfer smacks the back of that bait so hard. Sounds like somebody shooting a gun in the back of the boat. Just every time.
Yeah. So I helped them get on the map as well. And I helped Toray, which was a Japanese fishing line, get on the map with bass anglers as well. Obviously, and then I did some stuff in between all those and in front of those private contracts with some companies to help them get to the next level. And I think for me, the one thing that I'm excited about right now is, I've signed Aaron Martins, obviously, for last few years as we're his title sponsor. And I just love watching him slowly develop into this part of Duo. And I mean, he can go on his own and go to any company he wanted. That he definitely could be to any company he wanted. So I'm very lucky to have him. We've been friends for a long time, and I'm very honored. But he did me a favor. We always wanted to work together. We'd always sit there and go, "Oh God, wouldn't it be neat if we could work together?" And so that finally happened. But his whole Apex stuff, and I work closely with him on some of the stuff. Some of the stuff I definitely influence, but really, like the Apex 100, that's really his baby. I mean, that was really his baby, which is a niche bait. It's a gigantic niche bait, but it's a niche bait. And really watching that kind of come to fruition was awesome. The most recent one that's happening is the Apex Tune. I'm sorry, not Apex Squared, I should say, which is a square bill crankbait. I'm just kind of letting out a little bit about that now. You'll see pictures and stuff, but I'm so excited. I don't know how much square bill fishing you guys do. It is really
so much square bill fishing, and I'm so excited about it. I can't stand it.
There's so many levels to square. Guys to even companies right now think of square bill. It's just shallow water crankbait. They don't understand there's a whole nother piece to square bill fishing. So we hopefully caught some of that or the majority of that passion that is in square bill. We hopefully caught it with his Apex Squared. It's a bulbous bait. Size and weight will be finalized really soon. It's 66 millimeter right now. It's pretty bulbous bait. It has real high float effect, which is good for it cleaning itself. You give it one twitch with the line and it blows grass off really well. So it's not to say that it's not going to grab stuff, but it's well done. Like it's a really solid. I'm really happy for him because I had very little to do with that. I was just kind of like, well, maybe we should, but he really did drive this big square bill. And I honestly feel like guys are going to be like right on. It has all the vibration that you need in a bait and a little bit more pounce on it as well. So it's got enough, and it's a silent one. It's a quiet one. So it's gonna blow a lot of water too, by the way. It displaces a lot of water as well. But you guys who know traditional real square bill fishing, that's where you're going to see it really shine. The guys that are cranking it on the rock, they're going to find out it's a very good shallow water crankbait as well. It is the size that you can easily change the hooks to. I think you can run hooks probably 2 sizes smaller if you wanted to. Especially if you're doing smallmouth and stuff like that. I run a smaller set, but everything that Aaron, I'm going to say almost everything that Aaron put out, which is kind of crazy because sometimes he'll be like, "Hey, can you put wings on that?" And you're like going under the water, So you can get challenged by what he does. So I am really excited about that. That Apex 66 Squared. It is really it's a really cool bait, and I have to give him credit. He he's done really well. Now he wants certain colors, so hopefully, you know, Duo will iron out colors for him exactly how he wants them, because you know he's particular too, right? So so we're working on colors for him, but I think that's a really cool one. And I'll give a hint that I'm working on even another spin bait. So there's another one coming, and I'll make sure you guys get those as well. But I'm really excited about it, because if we pull this off, this is going to be a hard one to pull off. But if we pull it off, you guys will understand why we put it into the niche. The goal here was not only to, you know, to stay ahead of the competition. I really wanted to keep that going, because we really worked hard for that. Like what we have done research wise, and building the bait and stuff sets us apart for sure. And I know that's bias, that's coming from me, but I really think, you know, I can say Duo, we've done a really good job with that. But it was also being able to keep that precedent of how effective the lure was. So each one of those spin baits, as we talked about, they are alike, but yet they have some power in them, each one of them. So we've added another one shortly. Fingers crossed, we're close. If we can change something, just we'll have this other spin bait in there. And I will say the line will be, you'll be able to go out now to your favorite restaurant at Duo and choose your spin bait exactly how you want it cooked.
Is it weird that you guys created a brand new category of fishing? I mean, like I mean, I know you're like, okay, ancient history, they had this, but like you guys created something that is like the Senko or like the chatterbait. That's like something totally different, and you've had your hand to help develop this. I think that's really, really insane.
Yeah, it's, you know, it is. I think, I mean, it's really cool. It really is cool for me. You know, I guess, yeah, if I could get $1 for that, for everyone was anyway. But no, you know, all joking aside, it really is cool. Duo will now be able to, how can I say this? Duo will now be able to continue spy baiting. If I kick the bucket tomorrow, Duo will now be able to continue spy baiting for the rest of its career, because it's that effective, right? It's just as effective as coming out with crankbaits that really work. It's just as effective as coming out with spinner baits that really work, or drop shot worms that really work. You know, they now have something that will literally will facilitate that technique for the rest. They don't even have to make another lure. They could just make sexy colors, and it's going to do its damage, because it was that proven, and so much underground went into that stuff. So that's really kind of cool, and I agree with you. It is. When I sit back and think about that, it's humbling. It really is humbling. But the kick again is, you know, when you guys come up to me and you go, "Did you know that I just like put a 6-pound smallmouth in the boat? Did you know I just put an 8-pound spot in the boat?" I think, first of all, for you to do that, you had to trust a little bit of what I said in order to do that. So so I greatly appreciate that. And the technique isn't as easy as I'd like it to be. That's why I kind of broke it up into sandwiching. You know, I'm going to talk about spy baiting in dirty water. I'm going to talk about spy baiting at different times later, but right now I wanted to really dial guys in as best as possible, give them the keys to the truck so that they could drive that truck in 4-wheel drive and do what it needed to do. And so we're there. I mean, a lot of anglers now are there. Like they really do get it as a technique, just like drop shotting. So so hats off to you guys for pulling that off for sure.
I also think it's really interesting.
Up with me. Goodness gracious. So.
I also think it's really interesting seeing it come into, like, this is my first experience with seeing a product start to come to market, right? Like when Wayne did really well on St. Clair in 2013, I think. Mm-hmm. But like this still, believe it or not, is the infancy of spy baiting. It's just all accelerated because of the internet and because of social media, because we all have this ability to communicate via webcam over the internet, right? But like you're seeing the pros really get it and pick it up, and like the top tier guys really get it and pick it up. But over the years, I think it's going to become like a chatterbait where you have to have it tied on, or it's a drop shot where you have to have it tied on. It's like you understand how to fish it. More guys can talk about it. So what's complicated now is like almost second nature when it actually becomes like socially or widely accepted.
Yeah, I mean, there each one of us can now today go on our boat with our eyes closed, and we can tie a drop shot on. All three of us can do that, right? No problem whatsoever. But when it first came over, if I could have had video back then, and if I could have done social media back then, you would have saw guys running around like a wrecked mess, man, trying to figure out how just to tie the loop knot and get the hook to stand straight. I mean, it was like they would tie, you know, and the hook would be off to the kilter so that that hook would actually sit at an angle, and then you hook your worm on, well, then your worm's at an angle, and then and I mean, these are bona fide tournament angles that throw the whole thing down and get upset. And then some of the guys were like, okay, finally got it cut, and then they would cut the main line, which they thought was their tag end line, and drop the whole drop shot rig in the ocean. I mean, it was just hilarious. I wish I would. It was worse than going to a boat ramp at lunchtime. It was hilarious. But what you see now is how effective and how efficient these guys are. Now these guys are drop shotting. You know, drop shotting on St. Clair changed St. Clair fishing dramatically. I mean, you know, that when guys figured out how to do that, that was a huge learning curve in one aspect, like positioning, boat positioning, finding fish, and going out and drop shotting. And once that happened, I can almost remember the date and time that happened. And now guys, you know, do it with their eyes closed, and everyone can go anywhere and drop shot right now, right? Everyone can do that. I had a guy, I don't know if you heard the story, but I had a guy in San Diego, real cool kid. He's a big swim bait guy. He loves swim baits, but he called me up, man, I really want to get on this drop shotting thing. And I mean, the Spybait thing. And I said, no problem, we'll do it. And off we go. And he finally learns it. He starts doing really well in tournaments. And then one day he tells me, dude, everybody has a Spybait tied on their boat, man. And I said to him, don't worry about that, because most of those guys got rewarded, you know, when the fish were breaking on the surface or something, right? That's when they got rewarded. Most guys haven't really got in and made the technique work and then expand from there. So I told him, you have nothing to worry about. Honestly, guys are just throwing it, and some of them are getting rewarded. Pretty soon, guys are going to start to get it. And then you're going to see ebbs and flow. Guys now kind of think that the summertime is the only time to spybait. Wait until the guys start figuring out how to pluck fish off pre-spawn. You know what I mean? We know our way to go up at pre-spawn, right? Well, I used to fish rock crusts, these rock forms that sat just before flats. And I used to crank those and catch some big smallmouth or even largemouth on those things, because those were staging positions for those fish to move to the flats to spawn. And now I spybait those. I don't even mess around with crankbait. Every once in a while I'll mix it up, but I have a spybait tied on and a rod ready to go, because I just close my eyes and I wonder if there's a big fish here. I fished a pro event last year. Was the Wild West event out here. I don't know if you guys know about that circuit, but it's a pro-am event. And I let me plug something in real quick. And I was preparing for that event, and I was fishing like in 5 foot to 7 foot waves all day, like 4 days in a row. It was just nasty big water. I get off the water, I was just beat up, and the water temperature was cold. It was just horrible, and nothing that I was doing was adding up. And so like one day I come back in from the pre-fishing day, and I'm exhausted, wet, cold, and I look down this dock line, and I'm like, that looks like a good place to spybait. I pick up my spinning rod, I toss the spybait, I start rolling that spybait along the dock, and boom, I catch a 5-pound largemouth. Now, when I was pre-fishing for 4 days, I couldn't get one of those things to go anywhere out there on the river. But I come back in the marina where I put my boat away, and there she is, a 5-pounder sitting there. And that really was the exclamation for me. It was just another one of those confirming moments, you know, that it just does what it's supposed to do.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Awesome.
Well, David, thank you so much for joining us, man. I mean, this has been unreal.
thank you guys. And like, I know I'll see you guys at the shows and stuff like that, but really both of you, Alex, Ben, you guys are doing a great job. I've been following you when I can. And I just want to let you guys know that your work, I know you work hard anyways, but I think it's paying off. And I think your viewership shows that as well. Keep it up. You guys are awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone that came in and watched this and hung out with us. But we'll catch you guys soon with some more information coming your way. So,
okay.
See you guys.
See ya.